Our story begins with this handsome blonde guy informing our protagonist that tomorrow he might die due to a dream he had, but Gion didn't understand what he was talking about. He had taken down thousands of calamities before, many more than the two chosen ones combined. How could he imagine that he would die later, in the Demon Tower? This was the place where the worst calamity that wiped out all of humanity lived. All of this started on the last day of the 20th century. The calamities appeared out of nowhere one day, and they backed humanity into a corner with overwhelming power. Just as humans were drowning in chaos and horror, there appeared 12 gods who called themselves divine gods. They promised humans they would give them the power to overcome the calamities, and they selected 12 awakened ones to save and control the world. But something unexpected happened. A 13th awakened one appeared, with the difference that this person hadn't received any blessing from any god, and to the frustration of the 12 awakened, he was overwhelmingly stronger than them. They were in the castle, and Gion defeated every calamity that showed up. They were in awe, and Hugo thanks him, since because of him they could conquer the Demon Tower. Gion just wanted them to thank him with some fried chicken. The other saints are talking about how if they take out the Crimson Eye, they'll probably get insane rewards. Since this is the worst calamity of all, at the very least, they'll get 100 billion. Gion says that everyone should just be happy with a good life and give the money to other countries. Since they are on the brink of bankruptcy because of the Crimson Eye, the office worker blackmails them. He needs to score a lot of cash to be able to cut deals with them. Only they can fix the face he used to have and heal that heavily damaged body. They also warn him not to go rushing off to kill calamities just because someone is crying for help, because they need a certain number of victims from accidents to rake in more reward money. John thinks that they call themselves saints, but in reality they were just thugs who only looked out for themselves. To cut all ties with them once he defeats the Crimson Eye. Later in the room, the boss of the Crimson Demon Tower, 10 chosen ones were terrified, to the point of just wanting to bolt from that place. The pressure he exerted, that demon was unlike anything they had ever felt before, due to the power he possessed. At this calamity, everyone starts running away from that death trap, everyone, except our protagonist, who charges in without a shred of fear. But everything had been rigged so Gion would fall into the trap, piercing him with a dagger in his chest and falling into the abyss of the Demon Tower. And in the place where he found himself, he wondered how much time has passed. What the outside is like right now, he must keep slashing, no matter what happens, since that place was a special trap that summoned infinite calamities. But that wouldn't be enough. To kill him, they better just wait. He is definitely going to survive this, and he'll rip those bastards' damn heads off. As time went on, exactly 20 years later, he reached the last demon he had left, who was scared to death, since it was impossible for him to get there begging for mercy. But Gion, by the way, check out this Viking. God doesn't hesitate to kill him. Finally reaching the end of his journey, and the tower starts to collapse. He finally thinks he can get out and passes out. Then the scene shifts to the outside. Everything was destroyed, and 2 people were running for their lives as high-rank calamities were chasing them. They had taken a wrong turn, and due to their bad luck, they ran right into them. The wolves catch up. Both were already resigned to their deaths. When an explosion is heard in the distance, they didn't understand what was happening. It's our protagonist who is cursing everyone out for how they dared to backstab him and shove him into a trap. They were total bastards. He's going to kill them all. Blinded by rage, he takes down wolf after wolf. They think those wolves were orange rank calamities, which even high-ranking awakened ones would struggle with, but he crushed them like bugs. And they're shocked because this guy was coming from that tower, but the other doesn't think that's possible. No one could make it out of that tower alive. Gion leapt toward them. On the verge of tears, they beg him not to hurt them. Then the boss wolf appears behind them. They both think they're dead. They couldn't survive an attack from the boss, but Gion intercepts the attack, protecting them, mocking the wolf, calling it just a puppy, taking it down in a single blow. Then he asks the guys if they could buy him some food and some clothes too. Later at a restaurant, Gion had eaten $10,000 worth of food, and he felt satisfied even though they told him they had no money. They ask him if he was a disciple and what he was doing in the tower. Gion replies that he just walked out of that tower without giving any further explanation, and that he isn't a follower of any god. Asking why he'd serve such despicable beings, and seeing his reflection in the spoon, he's startled, demanding a mirror immediately. And sure enough, his wounds had healed and his left arm had regenerated. He notices the mark on the palm of his hand, and a sharp pain hits as messages begin to appear. You have experienced death. You can now use the power of Ophiuchus. He enters a state of trance. Right before his eyes, there was a giant snake with eyes that radiated power and confidence. Gion wakes up, asking if they saw a giant snake too, but no one had seen it. and looking at his palm, he sees the skills he possessed. He realizes that his physical transformation was thanks to his new super regeneration skill. He's heard of similar things with the other saints, but he can't feel the presence of any god. But anyway, regardless of that, what he had to do now was kill the saints who fled and slaughter the one who stabbed him in the back. At the sight of the demon tower's destruction, reporters and officials are trying to figure out who could have done it. Even the saints would struggle against those beasts, and they start speculating that possibly Li Jian might have returned. At a conference, Yang Wei, the Saint of Ares, was there. Every reporter asks for his opinion on the potential news of Jian surviving after 20 years, but all he had to say was that he had no comment on the matter. Later in his car, he was fuming because he had only heard Jian's name all day long. Over and over, what they said was impossible. He couldn't have survived 20 years in that tower when there were tens of thousands of evil beings there, and to top it off, they were all black rank. His body was already wrecked by the backlash of his powers, and he hadn't even received a blessing to help him. But if in the hypothetical case he survived, it would be all over for them. In another scene, Otis gets off the plane, drawing massive admiration from those present for being the divine Sagittarius, a true chosen one on his way to a super important conference. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. He figured it was those damn journalists creating even more conspiracy theories about Gian, who they always claim is still alive. But 20 years had already passed. He doesn't get how that's even possible. Remembering what happened, he had been outside the tower, at Gion's request, defeating the calamities. He prayed his prophecy was wrong and that Gion would return safely, but only the divine beings survived. They abandoned Gion and came back with the head of Red Eye. Their achievements were recognized, proclaiming the 12 divine beings, including him as a hero, allowing him to gain money and authority. He couldn't believe Gion had died and requested a search multiple times, but Molan, the divine being of cancer, convinced everyone it wasn't possible, since the number of calamities in that tower was just too high. No one could get in, but if Hugo wanted to go, he could go alone. But none of the 12 constellations would help him. He concludes that no matter how strong he was, Gian getting out of that tower was impossible. And then a call from the Prime Minister comes through, who tells him that yes, he knows the demon tower has fallen, but Hugo isn't about to believe any conspiracy since Gian was dead. There was no other explanation, but the Prime Minister just received info from Korea that Li Jian's exclusive hotline was active just moments ago, and Hugo excitedly orders the car to stop, because the calls he missed earlier were from Gian. He calls back, and what he hears is a, "Mosh, listen here, you little shit, I'll find you, and I'll kill you, heh?" He screams to turn back to the airport, saying the negotiations in England didn't matter. He wants to go back. Meanwhile, Gian was catching up on what had been going on. Meanwhile, back on Earth, he sees the news that his name is trending, and the comments are a bit messy. Many called him a scrub, saying the 12 constellations were the ones who saved him. It says he did nothing, which pisses him off, but he calms down, remembering that he had donated all his property and belongings to orphanages before dying. He wonders if they were kept safe, but he sees that all his stuff was split up among the 12 constellations. He flips out again, smashing the phone and declaring that now he's definitely gonna kill them all. Then he starts crying over his phone because he hadn't even finished paying it off. Gian plans to announce his return, but it wouldn't be smart yet, since his physical appearance had changed from 20 years ago. If he says that he's Gian, everyone will just call him crazy. So first he'll take care of getting revenge on every single one of the constellations. Then he gets a notification. Someone is watching you. He goes out to get some fresh air and realizes what was watching him was a servant god. Servant gods are divine entities controlled by the blessed gods. These servant gods were subordinates of Ares. Gian gets pissed. Those things were demanding a tribute, and then this stupid couple shows up talking about the trends. People were being so dumb giving all that attention to a loser who's been gone for 20 years. His buddies tell Gian to get out of there, since they were from the Gemini group, who were known to be dangerous. The guy tells him to F off, blowing cigarette smoke right in his face and asking why he's so triggered. The woman thinks they should just leave before that guy pisses himself from fear. He agrees because losers like them usually liked types like Gian. Obviously, they were hiding behind someone who was clearly weaker than all the saints. How could they say that to John? John calls them cockroaches. They turn back and get in his face, telling him to repeat what he said, asking how such a weak person could even... But before he could finish the sentence, Gian gives him a light tap that sends him flying and knocks him out cold. Seeing what happened, the woman tries to land a scratch on him, but the protagonist saw it coming and gives her a flick with his finger. I know this move as the flick technique. Not sure about you guys, haha. The buddies complain that he shouldn't use his abilities in the middle of the street, especially against Rangwa's disciples. But he was only defending himself. If he hadn't done anything, he could have died. He knew something was off. When he hit them, this artifact seemed divine, but that was impossible, since only the saints are supposed to have them. And here's the explanation. Jion didn't know it, but when humanity was nearly wiped out by the calamities, the divine gods chose 12 elected saints. But since the world can't be protected by just 12 people, the saints gathered people to follow them and formed a divine squad. And the people who have awakened by receiving power from the saints are called disciples, who are classified into ranks. For example, there's the triple S rank, which are the elected saints who lead their divine squads. The double S rank are the 10 stars, who can be considered candidates for sainthood. S rank is the strongest disciple, who commands disciples in battle. A rank are the strongest disciples in their units. B and C rank are the rest of the disciples. And the power of the divine gods comes from the faith of the disciples. I don't know if the word disciple bothers him, but I don't know, it kind of gives me a weird vibe. Disciples. That's why the saints hold all kinds of contests to recruit people who want to join, and the chosen disciples receive gifts from the divine gods. It's been like this for the last 20 years. Jion turns around and the servant gods, who had witnessed everything, were egging him on to finish off the man and woman. They were itching to see some bloodshed, and promised him a useful gift if he killed them both. These beings were like the shadows of the divine gods. Opposing them was the same as opposing the gods themselves. They tell him to hurry up and do what they want, but Jion wasn't having any of it. He wondered why Yang Wei's thugs were in a place like this, but it was obvious. They were just trying to line their own pockets. He thinks Yang Wei is still the same old bastard he used to be. He stomps his foot, letting out a boom that makes the sheep clouds vanish. Looking at the unconscious guy, he figures if the dude was a big shot, everything he was wearing must be designer, so he robs him blind. A few hours later, they're outside the buddy's apartment, who thanks him for saving his life and bringing him home. But Gaon asks if they're going inside yet, saying he's already sleepy. He also takes the chance to get a haircut, and man, he's looking like a total snack now. In the past, every strand of hair was precious to him, since he kept losing hair, as a side effect of his skills. He notices a small calamity inside the house. That was very strange, because usually it meant something was attracting them, and it was because he had all those cursed artifacts. One object in particular he received directly from Gemini. They were his most prized relics, but the protagonist just slices it up. The buddy cries out that the mask was a divine artifact, that it controlled whoever used it. The music box was meant to steal personal information. The watch was meant to bring calamities. He's filled with rage, thinking that the saints didn't just steal his money, but are also selling and giving away evil artifacts to fuel their magic and wealth. Suddenly, this character appears who was the owner of that house. The homie tells him the whole story of how they had met him, but he doesn't believe him at all, and to top it off, he broke all the divine artifacts in the house. He asks him which divine painting it was or which divine god he followed, and upon finding out he followed none, he asks for his name. Hearing the name Li Jian, he flies into a rage, stating that he broke into his own house and broke all the divine artifacts while pretending to be Li Jian, activating all his power. A warning message appears on the portal, stating that if he keeps this up, he'll burn the whole house down. He checks the redhead's stats. He was pretty strong. He could even use high-ranking summon at a young age. He tells Jimin to get out if he doesn't want to die. It's the first time they say his name. Man, I'm like an idiot, calling him homie every second, but out of nowhere, Zhong comes up behind him, gives him a flick, and stuns him, mentioning that he could have burned the whole building down. He's going to sleep, and upon entering the room, it was full of figures of him. The redhead challenges him, telling him not to dare go in there. That was the collection he valued more than his life. But it made John uncomfortable, so he took their heads off, just to be able to stand them. The next day, Hugo only saw news about John, and he was definitely alive. They go to take his order, but he notices immediately that it was Jean Wei, who had possessed another body to communicate with him. He thinks he must find Gaon before anyone else, but he doesn't have a single clue where he could be. Later at the divine Ares temple, they tell him about the appearance of someone who defeated the household gods. They also mention that Hugo's Blessed One had canceled his plans to head back, putting the goat god on high alert. They had also found a disciple, passed out in just his underwear. According to witnesses, he argued with a handsome man. Because of that, he calms down a bit, because Li Jian wasn't like that. But there was a chance he had changed, and if he kept this up, his position would be threatened. At the Gemini-affiliated hospital, there's this old man demanding to know why they couldn't help his son in that state, but they calm him down. since they had already sent him to settle what had happened. The S-rank Gemini disciple Permafrost. Then the two friends are at the supermarket. Jimmy asks him if he really thinks it could be Jian, but the redhead is in denial. He's totally different. Besides, Lee Jian was a hero who saved humanity, not a thug. Suddenly, a blizzard shakes them both. It was a thief, who was a Scorpio disciple who could use insane levels of speed, which helped him swipe all their gear and wallets in 5 seconds. Not even an S-class could catch him, but someone lands a blow that drops him to the floor. It was Gaon. He had forgotten to tell them to buy some chicken. Then the bald guy who isn't bald appears, remarking that it was impressive. Scorpio disciples were notorious for being hard to catch. Judging by his energy, he felt like a regular disciple. So next time, he should call a cop. Suddenly, a loud boom shocks everyone present. The thief thinks that earthquake was the perfect chance to escape. But as he's making a run for it, a calamity appears. But he doesn't give a damn about that, since not even the calamities could ever catch him. However, the supermarket security catches him. Alarm triggered. There's a calamity inside. He asks the unblessed civilians to evacuate the area immediately due to the appearance of the Red Queen. The place has turned into a red zone. As panic sets in, a child is being stalked by a calamity, but the MC saves the day. He didn't get why there were calamities in a market, but that didn't matter right then. It had been a while, so he's going to do a little warm-up. The scene shifts to the Goat King. He is informed of a calamity in a supermarket. The Spider Queen calamity had appeared. He believes that's the creature that they weren't able to defeat. He thinks it'll be a nightmare to face a red-level calamity all by himself. Here, the 6 levels of calamity are explained. Blue-grade God's safe level. Green level safe areas. Yellow level caution areas. Orange level dangerous areas to be guarded. Red level areas completely ruled by calamities. And black level the total extinction of humanity. And now that spider has shown up, turning the entire supermarket into a red zone. The goat boss claims their only real option is to bury the supermarket. It had to be a secret. If people knew the spider was there because of them, they'd lose their followers and power. They'll just say everyone inside died, and will send disciples to the scene to bury the building underground. Meanwhile, the faux bald guy was busy freezing the calamities, feeling all smug, thinking this is why he's S-rank. But the calamities break through the ice with ease. Jian shows up and tells him to move out of the way, to step aside for the pros, and starts hurling sodas like they're bullets, slicing everyone up with his skills along the way. Thanks to that, he has new skills and can create artifacts. The bald guy demands to know how it was possible for such a weak person to wipe out those calamities, when even he couldn't do anything. But then he realizes that he was the person the disciples from his divine temple had been looking for, and it was clearly him, since he was wearing the same clothes as them. Plus he had the Gemini insignia. He shouts that clearly. That was the reason why he was so strong. It was the divine artifact. But then entering the scene, the Spider Queen appears. Jian doesn't hesitate for a second and attacks. Everyone there is stunned. It was insane. A single person taking on a red-level calamity without any divine artifact. The redhead and the bald guy get a telepathic message from the captain. They had to get out of that building fast. The Ares squad was going to bury the entire building, and they had no way to stop them. They are trying desperately to hide their screw-ups with the Spider Queen. The bald guy had teleportation skills, so the two of them could leave without a hitch. Seeing the situation, the redhead refuses to follow the orders. There were too many people in that place. His best friend was there too, the S-rank. Argues that there was no other way out. He could only teleport 2 people. He has no intention of being buried alive there and told him not to bother him. He couldn't ignore orders from the captain of the divine temple, so for that reason he will get rid of the dead weight so he doesn't have to worry about her, threatening to kill his friend. And the two of them get into a fighting stance, activating their powers, but the bald guy gets slashed in the back. The friends explain the situation to him. They had to treat the wounded, save the people, and stop them from being buried. The S-rank crawls out of the rubble screaming that they were all going to die, while he'd be the only survivor. But the Spider Queen snatches him up and eats him. Jian sees the chaos and tells them to go help the injured. He'll take care of the Spider Queen himself. It'll only take a second. From Yang Wei perspective, his seal wasn't working for some reason, and a massive power emanates over the place. It was a giant serpent. People run out begging for help, reporting that there are wounded people inside and that the spider has been killed by some man. Yang Wei is shocked. How could anyone do that? Not even he, one of the 2 chosen, could do it. It was impossible. He had to see for himself what happened. He can't believe it. The Spider Queen, a red-level calamity, lay dead at his feet. He can't find a logical explanation for this. He hears a familiar voice, and sure enough, it was Hugo, but it was impossible for him to do something like that. A chill of fear runs through his body as he hears the words, "Hey, Juan Carlos, how's it going, dickhead?" Gian asks why he looked so messed up, since it had been ages since they last saw each other. Outside the supermarket, the redhead realizes that he really could be John based on his movements. Just then Hugo arrives, who we're told is the father of the redhead. He was extremely worried, but gets no answer, and Jimin remarks that John should be fine. Shocks and rattles Hugo. He asks him to explain in detail what happened just as an explosion rings out inside the supermarket. The goat had attacked John without warning because he felt cornered, but he calms down since he thought it was Gian, but this guy looks completely different and wasn't covered in scars. He tells him how dare he not know his place and go against him. He better get ready for what was coming. But the MC strikes with a gut punch, and while he's in the air, takes the chance to land another blow. On the ground, he calls them out. They stole his divine artifacts and his assets. They even forged his will, so he's going to kill every last one of them. He'll destroy everything they have. Yang Wei says the way he talks and acts was exactly the same, and he couldn't even track his movements. He thinks it really might be John, but if it truly was John, he was going to test him by summoning the divine god Jade Emperor Ares, using all of his abilities, trapping him in chains and launching an insane amount of swords at him, stating that he hadn't wasted his time. Over the last 20 years, he was clearly stronger than before. But the pile of swords shatters and John lands a direct hit to his face. He had finally recognized him. Sure enough, he has returned from hell. Thanks to defeating him, he unlocked new skills that he's ready to use. The god, Ares, was stunned and trembling, crying out that it was impossible. John was being quite merciful, so he'll make him feel what he felt for 20 years. Then Hugo arrives at the scene where clearly the only human being capable of doing that was Gian. Finding Yang Wei body, he wonders what the protagonist Gian will do now. Meanwhile, he is at the Museum of Divine Artifacts of Ares, but in the facility. There were only fakes, except for what Gian was looking for, taking it from its spot immediately. All the museum guards surround him, threatening that if he doesn't return the artifact, they'll have to use force. Gian refuses and attacks them all with a single move, and activating Aline. It was this little thing which was incredibly strong, and a message triggers an alert. That door was rigged with divine artifacts. Hugo, seeing the people running, thinks he's a bit late and spots him. He goes running toward him. He starts talking to the guy behind Gian, crying he thinks his scars had healed. He looked a bit different, but he was glad he was alive, and Gian kicks him and asks if he wants an actual beatdown, so he would recognize his friend for once. Little Hugo cries while hugging him. He really was alive. Gian hits him again and confirms that it truly was Gian. Then the god of Sagittarius appears, doubting Gian is alive, so he'll see what happens if he shoots an arrow at Gian, but Hugo tries to calm him down. Gian says that when he left the tower, his house was sold, his will was tampered with, and all his relics had disappeared. He was beyond furious, so he'd have to deal out a bit of payback. A crowd is heard in the distance, demanding the head of the man who stole everything, but Gian had only swiped a few small things. The guards knew they were no match for this guy, so they called in a monstrosity to counter him, and there appears on the scene the beast of wealth Pixiu. The MC knows what he has to do. He asks for his divine sword to show his true power. And that sword had awakened through the power of the serpent. Thanks to that, he can clearly see the beast's weak points. Hugo thinks it was incredible. He always threw himself at his enemies without fearing a thing. He was proud, but then the beast crushes him with its paw. Just kidding. John lifts it up without breaking a sweat. It was his turn to strike, slicing off the beast's paw. And with his second attack, he unleashes his power, not only taking down the beast, but totally wrecking the entire place in a single blow. Hugo thinks that's the same level of power he had 20 years ago. A notification pops up for John, asking if he wanted to tame that beast. He accepts, and Pixiu was now his, and it could also shrink down to a small size, celebrating that he could now store more treasures. Later, they are arguing. John calls Hugo a traitor. Hugo thinks he has no right to say that, since he's been worried sick about him all those years, but John thinks that's a total lie. He got married, had a happy family, had kids, and enjoyed life. Meanwhile, he was trapped in a place crawling with demons. He should feel ashamed and regretful. He couldn't even recognize his friend when he saw him, but he told him not to feel too bad. After all, divorce wasn't that bad. Hugo says that he wasn't divorced. He didn't want to talk about his wife and asks him about what happened at the tower. At that time, he was outside, and by the time he got in, the others already had the head of the Crimson Eye. He also asks him not to say anything to his kids, because they are huge fans of John. John starts telling his terrible story. He was stabbed in the back and thrown into a trap. That was a place that was swarming with countless calamities. On top of that, besides the endless calamities appearing non-stop, the Crimson Eye that was supposed to be dead had come back to life. It turns out that the Crimson Eye they saw wasn't the real one. The true Crimson Eye was deep within the tower. He managed to defeat it. But the real problem wasn't the Crimson Eye, but the tower administrator, who was a demon capable of reviving dead calamities. Over the course of 20 years, he somehow managed to get out. At the end of his journey, he was able to kill the administrator, and after exhausting all his strength, he remembers dying there, but when he woke up, the calamities were gone and he gained his current abilities. Honestly, it was all pretty confusing, but he only knows one thing. The bastard who stabbed him knew the layout of the demon tower. He's going to punish the constellations, but as for the one who stabbed him, he'll make them suffer in the worst way possible. And for that, he needs to build the right team to strike back hard. He creates Queen Spider Fragment, a B-rank knight. It has several qualities, and Hugo thinks it's pretty cool, but for a high-rank item, it didn't seem that great. Gion says he had no idea how many materials. He used to make that. In fact, he was also thinking about making another one for Hugo, but after those comments, he should just forget it. And Hugo, immediately starts backtracking, saying it was incredible, and that he truly was a genius for being able to create divine artifacts. Gion pulls out his unique divine artifact, the Safe of the Golden Fleece. He heard that Hugo was broke, so he brought it to fund him. Hugo yells that he wasn't poor. Gion thinks that the higher the rank, the better artifacts they'll create, but they realize that no one there could actually use it. He curses everything because he had already sent a declaration of war to the radio. Well, they just had to find another way to face them. We switch scenes. Korea Blue House. They are gathered. Several heads of the Divine Squads. Oliver from the Leo Squad was arguing with Choi, captain of the Gemini Squad. They are talking about what happened with the Queen. Spider throwing in each other's faces everything they did wrong. The two are about to fight, but an alert comes in. Something big had hit the news. They had received a message containing photos of Yan, Wei, and a note saying, "I'm back," from the late Lee, Jian. Hugo is scolding him, asking how he could do that, and to top it off, he announced it everywhere. Clearly, it was a declaration of war, and it was too cruel to kill someone. But Gion hadn't murdered Yan Wei. He had only turned him into this little plushie. His abilities had improved quite a bit. From the experience of that battle, now he was able to contain Yan Wei's soul. He also hands over the dagger he was stabbed with. It was a special grade. It couldn't have belonged to Yan Wei. It must belong to someone else. He'll stop by the Divine Artifact shop to find more information. At the scene of the disaster left by Gion, they inform the Saint of Ares, Sophie, Marty, that there was a slight possibility that Gion was alive. She just thinks it's a bad joke. She mentions that they'll go to the Divine Artifact shop to sell their gear and make some money to be able to buy artifacts at the auction, but another Saint had also requested to participate in the auction. It was Stevens, Marker, who is obsessed with Gion's divine artifacts. He was the Saint of Leo. The MC, meanwhile, was in the city, heading to the Divine Artifact shop. I've said Divine Artifact way too many times, sorry. Which had an S-rank appraiser. The redhead had given him the tip thanks to his boss. The boss wanted to meet the person who defeated the Queen Spider. John gives him an A-rank dagger for bringing him there, and they arrive at the same time. People are stunned to see such a beautiful person. It was the Saint of Aquarius, Saint Sophie. She asks to go in, but she couldn't. Someone was already inside, before her. On the outside, she plays it cool, but on the inside, she was furious. Inside, the appraiser asks about the item and who had made it, and upon learning the MC made it, he thinks he might have a connection with the hero. Jian asks Sunjae to please wait outside, as they needed to talk privately. Once alone, he mentions that not many people knew Gion was a legendary producer. Regarding the artifact he brought him, there were countless fakes out there, but this one was different. It feels like a masterpiece by Lee Jian, and he can recognize it because he was a disciple of the hero. Jian is confused. He doesn't remember ever having any students, so he thinks about hitting him for scamming, but the man hands him a notebook. Jian remembers it. He was a rookie who had followed him 20 years ago. He had a wonderful eye for items. Gaon leaves him that book. Since he was young, he left the path of Lee Jian in his hands. The book flows, but they are interrupted because the saint was outside, demanding they not keep her waiting. She was the Saint of Ares, forcing her way in, and when she enters, she realizes that man was very handsome. She needed to get closer, but the aura and power of the serpent make her kneel in terror. She felt as if hundreds of snakes had coiled around her, and she comes out, running desperately away from that place. Jian finds out she was Saint Sophie and starts laughing. He hadn't recognized her because of all the surgeries. She might have changed on the outside, but her trashy pest-ridden heart never will. In an alleyway, Saint Sophie is having flashbacks of the old Jian. She thinks that power was overwhelming. It was a lot like his, and she's ordered to return to the pawn shop to simply kill them all. The appraiser deserves it for blowing her off, and the man for triggering her past trauma. She will be given a divine artifact that will grant her godlike powers, and, as expected, she obeyed because there's no way to say no to a request from the 12th celestial beings. Later, the redhead is walking casually through the central district. He notices that the water has a trace of mana, and bodies of water start popping up all over the area. The redhead demands a guard explain why they were using an ability in a neutral zone, but she was just following heaven's will, activating a divine object and trapping everyone in water bubbles. Now she'll handle the appraiser and the man at the shop. The appraiser is locked in a water prison, and Gion was held at knife point by the guard. The saint had told her to kill them, but if they apologized and bought the divine artifacts, they might be forgiven. Gion grabs the knife and snaps it with just his fingers. He was told not to move, and they attack him with a water dragon, but Gion shuts it down with a single shut up. Seeing Gion's power, she pulls out her best weapon, something made with the saint's mana. An orange rank summoned the water wolf. Gion gets a hold of some daggers and stabs the wolves over and over. The guard was shocked. He had wiped out her best weapons, and seeing the look in Gion's eyes, she bolts. The redhead enters right away, describing the chaos that happened outside. They had to get out of there since more people might be coming. He would recognize those moves anywhere. He asks if it was possible that he was. Gion thanks him and tells him to come back whenever he wants. Later, while the two are eating ice cream, this guy shows up. He was the captain of Choi's divine squad. He was thrilled to meet him. He had heard so many great things about him. He tells him he's out talent scouting. One of the 8 divine artifacts belonging to Gian will soon go up for auction, so they could go and talk about a deal he has for him there, and only he can get him in because that place was a private venue. The scene shifts to the fortress city of Drachma. The blessed of Aries, the blessed of Leo, and also the blessed of Sagittarius Hugo were gathered. Sophie goes to talk to Hugo, trying to get under his skin. He used to be the best-looking man among all the saints. He also used to be strong, but everything had changed since his disciples were very disappointed in him. Hugo ignores her, but she makes a comment. He couldn't just do whatever he wanted. If he did it again, he could lose his children, just like he lost his wife. She wasn't dead, but because of his incompetence, his family was falling apart. Hugo doesn't like her words at all. Letting loose his skills, he throws a punch, but Sophie blocks it without any trouble. She makes it clear where he stands. He was way too weak to even raise his voice at her. And just as she's about to attack, Gian appears, neutralizing her ability and giving her a flick to the forehead. Dazed, he asks Hugo to stop following him everywhere. Did he actually like him? And that girl also. She followed him everywhere, so maybe she liked him too. And we are shown the saint's memories. She hated Gian. She was terrified of him. His hideous face, covered in scars. His personality and his cold eyes. One day 20 years ago, Gian arrives confronting her about how she could be doing that. He had sent her to the rear to treat the wounded, but the people there, most had lost arms and legs, trying to protect her. Because of her mistake, they should go heal those people immediately. But she screams for him to let her go. She didn't give a damn if those people died. No one would care. In fact, they should be happy to give their lives for the saints, and Gian slaps her. He says she needs a good beating to teach her some values. Later, she wakes up and screams when she sees he was right in front of her. They think they had underestimated her by tying her up with just ropes. But Gion realizes it and hits her for being stupid. She laughs because she had an ability that activates when she is hit. Her body would boil with acid. But as we know, the MC has the ability of healing and regeneration. And now it was time to settle the score. She had sent someone to kill him, so she will face the consequences by hitting her many times. His skills improve and he gains divine status, which allows him to have disciples. He doesn't quite understand, but he leaves the rest to Hugo because he is going to the auction, and at that very moment, the Saint of Leo arrives. Stephen, who activates his power immediately upon seeing that. Sophie was captured. Hugo had no intention of telling what happened. He was only there for the auction, and he shouldn't be there, just to get Gion's weapons, given that they won't make him stronger than him. Upon hearing those words, Stephen thinks he needed to know his place. He shouldn't keep talking about Gion in front of him, since he was now the strongest of them all, and a disciple shouting reports that someone was buying up all the items. The Saint had no time to waste with Hugo and immediately goes to see what was happening. He gives him one last piece of advice. He had to keep his attitude in check if he wanted to keep living in the VIP lounge. Gion is buying item after item that belonged to him. The guy with glasses had given him the option to buy whatever he wanted so that he would join his divine circle. He offers him all kinds of perks. If he joins Ares, he could be the successor. He'd have wealth and honor all for free. But Gion thinks they were asking him to become the lackey of some pathetic god. At that moment, they hand him a divine artifact that the glasses guy had bought. Terrified, he asks to return that relic since it belonged to Gion, and one person is obsessed with his items. They could end up getting hurt if he finds out. Then the door breaks, and Steven bursts in looking for a fight, asking who dared to lay their hands on his items. The captain explains the situation and apologizes, saying they'd return his item. In fact, they were going to give it to him for free for the trouble, but Gion didn't see it that way. He wasn't going to return anything that belonged to him, but he could sell it to him for 200 billion. Steven laughs, thinking that Gemini only had cowards, but he was different. For his great courage, he'll give him a gift using an attack with the spirit of Leo. Clearly that attack could finish off anyone, but the MC clearly wasn't just anyone. He thinks it's his turn to give the saint a gift. For the first time in a long while, he felt fear. But just then, a new item is announced at the auction. Steven gets hyped and leaves because finally, he would be just as strong as John. The only thing that set them apart in the past was that John had a weapon. He was convinced that what was right before his eyes was the strongest artifact, the one that would proclaim him the strongest. And in the distance, a calamity dragon also plans to get its hands on that artifact, that bone. It was an artifact that John had obtained in a high-ranking tower. The bids reached insane prices. Everyone wanted the legendary weapon. John was watching his money pile up. It was quite a show, and Steven's voice, booming from the stage, had offered $1 billion for that item. And since no one bid any higher, it was sold for $1 billion. When Steven was finally happy to have obtained the most precious thing in the world to him, everyone starts chanting his name. At that moment, a wall of the venue shatters. It was a calamity demanding the divine item, attacking Steven, who bats it away and sends it flying to the other side of the city. Because of that, the magic tower starts to crumble. If that debris fell on the city, it would be leveled. As a result, all the disciples gathered and released mana to stop the debris from falling. But at this rate, they couldn't destroy it all. And at that instant, the Saint of Sagittarius leaps into action. Everyone thanks him, but then appears another calamity which could use the bodies of its prey to control them. Hugo charges in, but in a moment of carelessness, the other calamity appears. But luckily for him, George kicks it away and insults Hugo, asking why he was still so bad at fighting, saying it was embarrassing to have such a weak friend. Hugo defends himself, thinking he did his best, and then Steven enters the scene, demanding to know why they were interrupting his experience with his divine artifact, and uses a royal skill against the calamities and the people there. That was his famous lightning storm, which could not be destroyed. He uses it to test his new weapon. People are saying they were saved, that he was the strongest man in the world, even stronger than Gion, but when he lands a hit, the calamity doesn't feel a single thing. He tries again repeatedly, but nothing happens, and the calamity sends him flying through the air. Meanwhile, Gion was beyond pissed. How dare they lock him up in that place? But since he was already there, he'd take care of the beast. It had turned the people into hostages, so he couldn't just attack it easily. But Gion had a plan to free them by force. Hugo thinks that it's impossible for him. Gion believed that from the start, he'd have to handle them all on his own. He had zero expectations for him, but Hugo would watch his back anyway. The MC jumps in, attacking with his black whips, breaking everyone present out of their mind control, but he got cocky. The mind control could regenerate, but Hugo was there to back up his strategy, and Gion manages to get into the perfect position for his big move. Thanks to that, he gains new and better skills. On the other hand, Steven is badly injured. Wondering why the great bone wasn't working, he was being cornered when Gion appears to kill the calamity. The beast senses the danger instantly. It leaves the Saint of Leo alone to focus on that man, but Gion uses his new ability and unleashes all his power, creating an instant pressure against his opponent. Seeing this, Steven thinks only one man was capable of that. The MC was thrilled to meet the person who'd been having a blast messing around in his name. They attack him with the super bone, but he stops it easily, and with just one hand, shatters the top part and also lands a blow that makes the whole city shake. He actually drills through the city using Steven's body, and since everyone was safe now, he uses Hoocha to collect everything worth keeping. He tells Hugo that he knew someone who had come with him to the auction. His name was Sanjay. He was young but pretty sharp. Hugo couldn't believe it. He'd been so careful to keep his kids from getting involved because they were massive fanboys of Jeon. His family could turn into total chaos. He immediately begs him to cut ties with Gemini, since it was a society up to no good, and their disciples were just as bad. But a dad makes himself heard saying that if he had called out the name Lee Jeon to that man, there's still a whip left that attacks him, but Line just eats it. Geon demands he spit it out. It could be dangerous. He shouldn't be so greedy and eat. The first thing he finds, seeing what happened, Sunjay recognizes Line, an artifact of the hero Geon and the power of the skills shown before. Plus, the only person his loner dad ever acted friendly toward like a sidekick, wonders if it could actually be Lee Jeon crying with emotion. Later in the United States, at the headquarters of the Leo Divine Circle, they are discussing the incident where their saint got thrashed. They still can't find him, so they need to do something. But she doesn't want to look for him. In fact, she's going back home. She didn't care what happened since her brother told her there was a cool guy at her house. She was Cheon, Yoha, one of the 10 stars of the Leo Divine Circle. On the news, they're only talking about Jeon and what happened. The Saint Sophie, she is hiding at home because the day before, she was about to give a press conference and the necklace John put on her revealed a message that said, "Tell everyone the truth about 20 years ago. I am not dead." She didn't know what to do. They had backed her into a corner. It was a mess. The only sane thing to do now would be to come clean about what happened 20 years ago. On the news, it's announced that Sophie will give an explanation soon, and a mysterious character thinks this won't end well at all. At the Sagittarius Sanctuary, Hugo's home, they're practicing archery, and as usual, Jeon humbles Hugo while Yang Wei treats him like royalty. That makes Hugo's blood boil, since he can't even get a glass of water for himself. The MC looks into his Sanctuary and Divine Circle and realizes he needs more members. Also, he had a busy schedule meeting people that day. The guy with the glasses is trying to talk him into joining the Gemini Divine Circle, offering him all the money he could ever want. It's annoying, but it's a once-in-a-lifetime chance. So after thinking it over, he says yes. But with a catch, he wants the badge he's wearing and access to their Divine Circle's Fire Forge. He also needed that badge to take advantage of the perks of being in the Gemini Divine Circle. And he's the kind of guy who needs something real before he trusts anyone. So he tells them he has another meeting, so they better decide fast. The guards weren't having any of this disrespect. As for the redhead, he was stoked because Geon had given him a dagger, but these two show up to rob him. The blonde was a Gemini disciple, called Chihuahuas, but let's go with Glenn. They were trying to get a rise out of him, but he couldn't push back because he's the Libra Saint's son and they knew it. That's why they were acting like jerks. He shouts at them to give it back. But the two buddies, they grab him and slam him against the table. The blonde guy asks him if he was trying to get everyone to call him a coward for screaming so much. They knew he was a fan of the hero Geon, which is why he was just as pathetic as him. Or maybe he was pathetic because of his mother. Hearing those words, the redhead snaps, unleashing his power and activating a skill that made Geon appear and headbutt the blonde guy. He's shocked to see Sunjay. He was just about to sign the contract to join Gemini, but he showed up there, and since he was there anyway, it meant those guys were threatening his dear nephew. How dare they hurt him? He'll show them what happens when you mess with a loved one. As for the friends, they were already dazed on the floor. Glenn kept repeating that he couldn't do that. He was the son of the company president. He said it over and over, but Geon was determined to teach him a lesson. Glenn thinks he can't humiliate him like that, so he activates his Bull of Paralysis skill. The MC thinks maybe he had something more interesting, but nope. Suppressing his skill, he'll show him how to use true power. He tells the redhead that whenever he's in danger, his uncle will have his back. Then, Nona appears, whom Sunji introduces with joy. He has defeated countless calamities. A hero who saved humanity, time and time again. The protagonist of the movie they watched, over and over as kids. He was Lee Jeon. Nona couldn't believe it, rubbing her eyes. Could it be Lee Jeon? But he was way too handsome. 20 years ago, he was covered in scars, but what mattered wasn't his looks. She was just glad he was safe. She introduces herself and asks for a favor. She knew it was a bit bold to say this to him, but it was urgent. But just as she's about to give him the message, a calamity appears inside, and Nona slices it in half. She couldn't make her proposal properly if there were calamities nearby. The alarm goes off again. Calamities had appeared inside the city. Everyone had to evacuate and find shelter immediately. Nona was desperate. She had to do it even faster. She wanted to wrap things up as quickly as possible to propose to Geon. He had been watching her to make sure she was safe, but they had enough strength and even more battle instinct than Hugo. But in a split second, a calamity is about to attack Nona. The Calamity remarks that they were quite strong. Normal humans couldn't dodge its attacks. It'll take her in, especially as a pet. Jian thinks this situation is perfect. He needed to gain some followers, so they're going to have a little fun. He tells his nephew and niece to handle the Calamities because he knows they're strong and now they'll have fun together. They manage to reach it and land a hit, but it does absolutely nothing to Gion. He asks if that's all it had, but it replies that clearly not. They were saving civilians, but Nona thinks Uncle Gion is definitely a beast, but his opponent was a fantastic race, the most dangerous kind among Calamities. She thinks she can't lose him again. The Calamity thinks maybe it hit him too hard, but Gion emerges from the flames, which were quite intense, and he was going to use them like a blowtorch for his forge. And now that he has some fire, he can't wait to use his hammer. The Calamity doesn't know what he's planning, but it won't let him use it. Nona appears to stop it, but her attack is useless. The Calamity, with just one hand, slams her against the wall of the building and tells its pet to devour her. But Gion appears, but John appears. He warns that he'll kill her if she ever touches his niece again. Upon seeing the fear right in the eyes, he feels death, which triggers her ultimate evolution. Fantastic beast. Wings of Hell. Code Red Danger in honor of her power. She'll destroy him with a single strike. She's shocked. He has blocked her inferno with nothing but a vinyl glove, and now she'll pay the price for setting the city ablaze, serving as the fire for his forge for the rest of her life. Jian hits her with a purification strike repeatedly, time and again, but it was impossible. To purify someone who was already dead, he had beaten the lizard so many times that it gave up, immediately becoming his slave. Nona approaches, and he remembers her words about her proposal. He gets a bit nervous, but Nona had doubts about his story. She couldn't understand how all the saints had survived that day, except him, even though he was the strongest of them all. The only theory that could exist was that they set a trap for Gion. He's surprised. It was to be expected from his friend's daughter. She was right. 20 years ago, they betrayed him. It was one of the 12 saints, and it was clearly because he outshone every single one of them. He killed the Crimson Eye, the greatest calamity of all. Now they could control the world. But they only had one obstacle. They felt great pity. He was locked away for 20 years. They even took his glory for themselves, even though he was the one who saved humanity. Jian calms them down. At that moment, he was already fine, and that was the only thing that mattered. And he'll see the last thing on today's agenda, Saint Sophie. She was giving her statement. She was caught between a rock and a hard place, but she had to tell the truth. If she didn't, Jian would finish her off, so she tells everyone that the person who really killed the Crimson Eye that day was Li Jian. Everyone falls into a state of doubt, asking multiple questions. What was the truth? Then a sinister shadow appears behind Sophie. It was Jean-Louis Morin. Yeah, he's French now. The Saint of Cancer turning off. The microphone asks Sophie if she had gone crazy. He explains she needs to act like always, if she didn't want the world to see. Him Ripper throwed out right then and there and told her to keep her mouth shut. He turns on the mic and gives explanations that Saint Sophie was just talking nonsense at that moment. He apologizes, claiming what they had said before was simply the truth. But the reporters weren't happy with that answer, so he's ready to use his power to shut them all up. But then Gion appears, kicking him down. Sophie screams that he was here, and he also gets a tail whip as a bonus. Gion demands explanations from the rotten crab about why he stopped her press conference. The Saint of Cancer and the others present didn't understand and didn't know who was standing right in front of them. The MC claims that he was the hero. Li Jian, everyone bursts out laughing, since he didn't look like him at all, and he looked pretty weak, but Jian will prove to the crab that it really was him, and to the reporters too. He tells Sophie to spit out the whole truth in front of everyone, but a purple aura invades the building. The Saint of Cancer had unleashed his god, and he's going to give a welcome to his old comrade at Hugo's house. He's enjoying some ramen and sees the news that a man claiming to be Gion is fighting the Saint of Cancer. The Saint of Cancer yells, asking if he only learned to dodge over the last 20 years. Gion yells back, asking if all he learned was how to make clones. In the last 20 years, the Saint of Cancer creates a vortex of power, which was stripping the soul power from the people present just like that. He had decided to use his blessing to finish him off. Gion asked him if he was the one who stabbed him that day. Jean-Louis responds, was the world's hero really holding a grudge against someone for something from 20 years ago? People would think he was just a thug and his ability wasn't just simple clones. He created clones using the life force of the journalists. Therefore, if he takes out a clone, they could die while he's being swarmed by all the clones. But Gion had swapped his body with the tail and strikes the real one. Jean-Louis knows he was only a part of the real deal, but he had a jackpot prize. For him, he rips the core out of his body, giving it to the snake, and everything goes back to normal. Jean thinks it was a very solid strategy, but tells him not to celebrate just yet. He still had cards left to play. Gion figured he knew that he couldn't just sit idly by if he were to be defeated. and a call from Hugo comes in, screaming at him, asking how he could do that. He was watching the news. He had just taken out one of the high-ranking psychos working for Jean-Louis, which triggered a rain of missiles. It's explained that the Marmot missiles, from the disappearance of Legion, Capricorn, and Genesis, worked together to create a decisive catastrophe-class weapon for calamities that humans couldn't face, and they became humanity's trump cards, and well, Jean-Louis set them to fire, automatically, if his vitals flatlined. The protagonist thinks and has the perfect plan to prevent any destruction and looks at the saint, Sophie. The city alarm delivers the message. Everyone must evacuate the area. Missiles would strike within the next few minutes, unleashing chaos among them. But Gion goes with the Saint of Ares on his shoulder, knowing that she could turn things into liquid, anything. She screams at him, asking how the hell he's going to do that. Gion tells her flat out that if she can't do it, then everyone is going to die, so she needs to suck it up and try her best. Up in the air, the divine god of Aquarius was shocked by the situation, so he throws out every buff he has so his chosen saint doesn't die. Royal skill, tear of the goddess. She pulled it off, and Gion leaves her in a free fall. She had done a great job, but if those fragments hit the ground, it would still cause total chaos. So he'd have to give a big shout out to the witch. He gets in touch with Hugo and demands that he lets him borrow his skill. Gion thinks that should be enough. He had the power of the Saint of Sagittarius and the Saint of Ares. He performs a teleportation spell, sending all the fragments to another location. Everyone was safe and the fragments were warped to the location of the Saint of Gemini's divine painting. Later at Changwei, they are discussing how Leo hasn't shown up yet. They've already defeated the Saint, taken down Cancer, and blocked the missiles. Then the MC shows up by crashing through the ceiling, asking them flat out what they were whispering about him. He arrives with the captain, and Hugo was there too, to get his money back. Even though he was supposed to leave a will, all of his assets had been donated to things they shouldn't have been. Most of it had been donated to the witch. They claim it was difficult to go against the Korean government. Their first choice was to give the money to Hugo, but since he wasn't Korean, they couldn't give the money to a foreigner. Plus, due to what happened in previous years, he had lost a lot of credibility. Gion strikes out because they chose a witch over his friend. Who did they think they were looking down on his friend like that? He knew he was a piece of work and looked like his slave, but they had no right to treat him that way, even if he's a saint with no money and absolutely stone broke. The more he talks, the angrier he gets. He tells Hugo to be strong and he'll demand that they return every single one of his belongings, but then a loud "shut up" rings through the scene. It was the voice of Jace, the Saint of Gemini. She wasn't planning on giving anything back. They were the ones who owned the bank accounts, and besides, there was damage to her palace, so she'd have to use that money for repairs since it was his fault. And now that he's right in front of her, she'll get rid of him by summoning a fairy spirit. This spirit was one of the strongest ones out there. But Gion didn't give a damn and just grabs her, tossing her through the air. Seeing what's happening, the fairy tries to bolt, but Gion grabs her by the head and tells everyone that clearly that wasn't the real Saint of Gemini. And well, after seeing all that, it was obvious they had to pay back the money or else something very similar would happen to them. Walking out of the building, they're happy about getting Gion's assets back, and they also had an idea of where the witch might be hiding. Back at Sunjae's place, they were eating while the fairy queen was trapped inside a safe. She had to answer every single question they asked. That weird witch still hadn't shown her face, but he knows it's not that she doesn't want to appear. In fact, it's not a matter of choice. It's because she literally can't. He gives her one chance to say exactly where she was, sensing the power he was giving off. She points to a figure. Gion knew it. He could smell that witch's stench in the house. He uses his third sense, and sure enough, Yais was inside that figure. We're told that from minute one, she knew Gion had left the tower, so she decided to investigate him by turning into that figure, but since Gion had broken it, she couldn't return to her original body. She begs her summon to help her, but she refused. She orders Sunjae to help, claiming it was a celestial decree, but he couldn't obey her either, even if it was his duty. He was the enemy of his divine painting. Upon hearing this, the redhead makes the choice to stop being Gemini's divine painting. If he had to face his hero, it was better to stop following her, and upon throwing down his badge, a thunderous roar erupts. Because of the act he committed, a divine punishment will be dealt. The saint begs him to rethink and ask for forgiveness. He was the one meant to take her place, and Gion was a despicable man, but he tells her to shut it. They would ditch anything for their own convenience, but his hero was different. He will always save those who are in danger. Don't you dare look down on him. He yells out those words, with blood pouring from his eyes, nose, and mouth due to Gemini's divine power. The goddess was set to finish off the redhead, however. Gion uses Abyss Slash, which causes all of Gemini's divine subjects to lose their powers. He thanks him for saving him. The saint demands to know what he'd done, as her power had completely vanished. We're given an explanation of what exactly happened. Divine gods burn through massive resources when entering this reality, so they always empower a saint, and that saint distributes that force among all their disciples. In other words, the god is the power plant. The saint acts like a power transformer, and the disciples are the outlets. Because of this, Jian had severed any connection to the power station. It was a skill from the crab and he'd stolen it. She refuses to buy his explanation. That was impossible. And if he did that, the goddess would step in. But that was exactly Gion's plan. Right then, the goddess Freya was charging up power to launch her attack. However, Gion pulls out a fragment of Cancer's core. The goddess was stunned. He was bummed that he didn't have a blessing, because if he did, he could have blown them all away. But he could make do with the Abyss Scythe attacking the goddess. The spectators are shocked. He could actually wound a god. The scythe shatters and the divine goddess, Freya, gathers all her power, summoning portals everywhere. But a halt rings out. It was Hugo and the god of Gemini, declaring that divine gods cannot interfere in this world in their true forms. Obviously, the Sagittarius god wasn't enough to enforce that justice alone, but they weren't the only ones opposing her. Meddling and multiple messages from all the gods start appearing, lending their power for breaking the rules, and several chains surrounded the goddess, inflicting her punishment. Before she left, she protested that she'll never forget what happened today. Jian tells her that next time, she should bring her big brother. After everything, he thanks Hugo. But that was just the start of what he had planned. He won't rest until he puts an arrow through the head of that goddess's brother. Hugo had also gotten him what he asked for from the palace of Yin and Yang. That building had top-tier security, but he used infiltration and stealth and stole it. Upon opening the scroll, Jian manages to register the affiliated spirits: legendary type Berserker, Giant of the Giant Kings, legendary type Jotun, and the Hard Warrior, legendary type. They were Gemini affiliates, but they wanted to be part of Jian's crew. But he didn't really trust their loyalty, so he asks them for proof, and they hand over the body of Jaisei. Because of that proof, he'll accept them all. Jaisei claims this is a nightmare, but Jian yells at her to keep quiet. Her goddess has completely abandoned her. He asks if she was the one who stabbed him, and after choking her for a long time, she says it was Virgo. All right, folks, here are the saints on the screen so you guys don't get the constellations mixed up. And also to say that if you're enjoying this kind of content, subscribe and like the video. Thank you so much. She says he should have told her that sooner, so she wouldn't have had to endure so much pain, and for the info, he'll give her body back. But by mistake, he gives her body to the fairy, who was thrilled. That also made Nona mad. Later at Hugo's place, they're deciphering contracts for their summons, double S ranks. The Gemini Saint was locked up with Gion's other relics, and the new members of his house were actually very hyped. They were buzzing with excitement. Hugo thinks it was the first time he'd ever seen such happy summons, but the three of them tell him to back off, that he was just the errand boy, but Jian corrects them. They were getting it all wrong. He wasn't an errand boy, but a slave. In shock, they tell Hugo that in that case, he shouldn't speak if he's a slave. Jian asks why they had chosen him instead of the divine god of Gemini. They couldn't stand that god's tyranny, and it wasn't just them, but the other gods and their commanders too. Currently, due to the unknown civilization that fuels the calamities, humanity has lost half the world. At first glance, it might look like the saints and the calamities are performing a tough balancing act, but the reality was very different. They were at the point where they couldn't reclaim the amount of land that has already been taken by the unknown civilization. Jian thinks about gaining allies. The civilization is beneath the Gemini Sea, but at the bottom of the Pacific it must be right next to the unknown civilization, so he'll have to check the situation and come up with a plan. The three brothers kneel before him and swear loyalty. They will support him in all his plans. John thinks it's impressive how bit by bit he's gathering high-ranking domestic gods. Nona thinks it was cool, and for that reason, he did a great job proposing to Lee. Hearing this, Hugo's personality completely flips. Propose, motherfucker! The goat's bear mentions that Hugo would be Gion's father-in-law, and Hugo snaps, shooting an arrow at him. He vents that he couldn't even get his daughter to say she loved him on Father's Day. He couldn't stand it. He goes all out with his skills. Gion thinks that guy really doesn't know the meaning of moderation. The way he's acting reminds him of a certain someone. His kids are screaming for him to stop. He couldn't beat the hero Gion, he was too weak. Gion asks why he's getting so tilted over what the kids are babbling about. He thinks Hugo is the kind of friend who would stalk his own daughter. He almost burned his whole house down by losing his cool. It was hard for them to express how they felt, but they loved him dearly. They brought him coffee and cake. He's touched, but the one from Jong was actually for Gion. He had uploaded the fight video, as instructed, and seeing his slice of cake, he realizes they gave the strawberry on top to her fiancé. Just then Nona gets an alert, a warning message. A red-level calamity has manifested at the Divine Bridge. All disciples were ordered to respond immediately. In the sea near the Philippine capital, Manila, the Leo Divine Squad forces were already there, rallying the troops about how brutal this battle could be. But they shouldn't fear. It was a huge chance to prove their courage, even though their saint leader wasn't there. Inside a tent, this guy senses that those men, they were just barbarians, only trying to hide their lack of skills with pep talks. But he didn't care about that. He wondered if his gift had ended up in the right hands. The messenger had arrived at Hugo's trashed house. They talk about what had happened, and the box starts talking about where Gion was. He was forging his new weapons, but they weren't coming out right. The hammer didn't work for what he needed. He laments not having the hammer that grants achievements. He had no idea where he could get his weapons back, and it was hard to get the materials for divine artifacts to just be throwing them away like that. And he hears a familiar voice, the statue. Cabra introduces himself. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. He was Sergevich. Gion says yes and calls him Sebastian, but his name was Sergevich. Vladimir Ivan. Yeah, definitely Russian. He was the Capricorn Saint, and just like him, he specialized in production. After Gion's disappearance, there were no notable weapons in the world that hadn't passed through his hands. He wanted to apologize for the events of the past and wanted to have a new relationship of cooperation, but the protagonist slams him into the wall. He figures if it's coming from him, whatever he says is bound to be trash. Sergevich. Vladimir says he was as grumpy as ever. They tell him to come out. It was time. On the news, they report that they've come to cover the red-level calamity raid. This calamity that 20 years ago, Gion had wiped out, but it had returned. It was a red-rank calamity. Many forces from different divine squads had gathered to fight it. The Leo Divine Squad force was there, but without Steven. The magic specialists, shifters and war masters from the Pisces Divine Squad, the Iron Wall, the Taurus Squad, the Battlefield Saints, the Aquarius Squad, and the forces of the Capricorn Divine Squad, tasked with producing and upgrading weapons. A ton of divine squads have been deployed for joint operations, and even the Capricorn Saint has shown up. Gion didn't get why that old geezer was on the battlefield, and when he sees that the old man has his hammer, he yells that the thing belongs to him. Not only had he stolen his gear, but he was also flaunting it. He's gonna have to beat his ass. Meanwhile, on the news, something absolutely massive emerged from the depths of that vast ocean. It was the 1,000 armed calamity. Red danger level. All units prep for battle. One person was hanging onto a tentacle, none other than the Leo Saint. Stephen Marker was soloing the calamity, but they realize the only reason he's fighting is because he's obsessed with that bone. The old man asks if they're ready to get started. The captain saw right through that guy. He was just trying to steal the reward. But now he's suiting up, so he shouts for everyone to take Pisces' physical strength stance. The Aquarius Squad provides buffs while Taurus takes defensive formation to protect the rear. The Leo Squad was locked and loaded to attack thanks to everyone's skills. The Leo Divine Squad gave the signal for all mages to open fire. Steven challenges them. They couldn't attack until he got his bones out. Meanwhile, Nona was about to jump into the fray, slicing through the giant octopus's tentacle. Everyone attacks together to claim the reward, but something else surfaces a monstrosity. It was the mega crack bridge of the week. Deep red risk rating. Seeing the calamity, the old man thinks they can't do anything against them. He's going to blow his explosives. It didn't matter that his comrades were nearby, but a salty dagger breaks the detonator and Lime takes a bite out of it. Suddenly, Gian thinks Sebastian was a total piece of work. The guys in the sea were staggering, unable to handle the swarm of octopuses. But it was overkill. Use a bomb to blow up his whole army. He'll have to think it over, and he'll give him lessons on how to prepare raw octopus. As for Nona, she had used all the energy in her legs earlier, so she didn't have much left. There were many small octopuses, but they had to take down the boss first. She uses another skill. She had seen her uncle's skills over and over again, so she was able to memorize them. Right now, she could replicate his ability. Once she was close enough to the body, she aimed straight for the eyes, but the Kraken had easily blocked her power with a tentacle. The beast attacks to kill Nona, but the Leo Saint steps in to intercept the attack. As her mind wanders, she imagines what her uncle would have done in this situation. She pictures him wielding his sword while flying toward his enemy, only to realize that it was actually happening for real. Gion dives into the attack. using the Great Mountain Piercer skill. He takes down the Kraken in a single strike. The soldiers complain that he only managed to land the final blow on one of the small ones, but the Kraken grabs him and swallows him whole. But Gion tears the Kraken apart from the inside and unleashes his lightning attack. Basically, at the end of the day, whether it has 10 arms or thousands, it's just octopus meat. He shredded it into nice little pieces, so they had to handle the rest. Those present idolized Gion, feeling that the legends of old, they weren't exaggerating. He actually was the strongest hero of them all. New messages start popping up. People he didn't even know were looking at him with respect and awe. They were starting to feel reverence, and the reporter reports on an event that will be talked about for ages. It just happened, Lee. Gion, the returned hero, has soloed the Kraken and the 10,000 armed calamity. And from a distance, Gion hears his niece's voice, asking if he was okay, and he notices the bone behind her. But anyway, he broke her spear, so he'll make her a replacement weapon soon. She's beyond thrilled, and the Leo Saint jumps in, getting excited because she was a direct subordinate of his, and if he's offering a weapon to her, that meant he could also make a weapon for him, and since he broke the bone, which cost a fortune, the least he can do is pay him back with a new weapon, and a green explosion goes off behind Gion. This green mist made the people from the Leo squad who inhaled the smoke lose consciousness and fall under Sebastian's control. Gion demands to know what he did to his line. He'll show something interesting while giving a signal, and the men affected by the smoke take it upon themselves to capture Nona and Gion. He talks about how nice it was to see him crushed. It was a sublime sight. Stephen asks him what he did to his men, and why none of them were following his orders. He had given all his men a potion, and because of it, the chemical reaction makes it so they can only listen to his command. And if he wants his men to return to normal, he had to listen to him. That was a weapon that Gion himself made. He makes him an offer he can't refuse. He had to kill Gion so his men would return to normal, and they had something in common. An inferiority complex against Lee Gion. He punches the walls, watching the hero's skills, and he punches the walls, seeing the crafting skills. But the harder they pushed, the more they realized that they couldn't close that gap. It was the chance of a lifetime. He will make her the best weapon in the world. By combining their strengths, they could surpass him. The Leo Saint wields the sword. Nona screams at him not to do it. She won't forgive him if he hurts her uncle. Stephen, addressing Gion, thinks it was a one-time opportunity, but after throwing the sword at him, he declares he'll never listen. He's determined to surpass Gion, but he doesn't have a second to waste on an inferiority complex, and he shouldn't be treated like a coward on the same level. The old man couldn't accept that lack of respect while attacking. Leo says 20 years ago he was just a ball of inferiority complexes, but he has pushed his limits time and again while failing over and over, all for the drive to surpass Gion. Then Gion pops up next to them asking how much longer they were going to take. He had let himself get captured to see what Sebastian was planning and to check Stephen's reaction, but they took too long. He tells him to get out of there. He had a few questions for him from 20 years ago. From the perspective of Sergei Beck Vladimir, days before the Devil's Tower raid, someone informs him that Lee Gion is going to die, and he wasn't talking about Hugo's prophecy, but about coming up with a plan to end him that sent a shock through him. It was the chance of a lifetime, but Gion shatters the rift in space and time and breaks Sebastian's flashback. He didn't care about his past. He accepts it and will tell him who it was, but he had to ensure his safety. Gion still feels he's in no position to ask for anything. If he kept wasting his time, he'd knock his tongue and jaw out with one hit upon seeing that tells him he was. Virgo wonders if Virgo was actually the mastermind behind it all. He had to go see his appraiser to investigate the results of the daggers, and also they had to give him back his hammer. Sebastian was shaking over losing his hammer, and Gion asks the three brothers to take care of Sebastian, releasing Leo's subordinates, the ones from Capricorn's Divine Squad. Seeing that their chosen one was defeated, they activate the plan to kill Gion themselves, firing a missile at him intending to send him to hell, but Gion also wanted to show off his new toy, striking the bomb with the hammer, turning the bomb into fireworks, and Leo's army was ready to get even for what had been done to them. So they retreat and bolt. He screams at Gion that he couldn't let them get away to pass him a weapon. Well-balanced, durable, and easy to use. Gion tells him there was one right here, grabbing him by a leg and hurls him at them. Later in the red zone outside the Western Protective Dome, in the European Union, there was the Virgo search Captain Jane. She mentions that the place was extremely creepy. Her order was just passing through, checking out what was going on there. The mission was to search for troops missing since yesterday. It was tough. The red mist and the atmosphere were very heavy. Everyone hears screams for help. They run to save them. But as they move, the captain feels the screams were coming from all sides and felt repetitive, as if they were recorded. She tells everyone to stop, But when she turns around, no one was left from her platoon, and a branch begs for help in a sinister manner. They were like tormented souls stalking him, and a giant appears behind them. At Hugo's house, a few days had passed since the fight at the bay. Jian was watching the news reports about him. His name was popping up everywhere. He gets a notification. He needs a disciple to activate his divine squad. He also activates his God's Eye skill and asks Hung Yeri to look him straight in the eyes. Shows she has 85% loyalty to Chingu and 81% to the snake owner. She wasn't a good fit because he needed someone who had more faith and loyalty in him. One of the three he had in mind had to be able to convert. He asks where they were, but they had left earlier that morning. Then he gets a call, and a flashback of the redhead starts. You can hear screams, "Run! Save me! I don't want to die! Please save me!" Someone begs him to listen. He has to hide in the car until his father arrives. He could think of it like it was just a game of hide and seek. He had to hide so the monster wouldn't find him. Until that moment, he had to be brave. He had to promise he would be brave with a smile on his face. He yells for Mom and wakes up. Nona calms him down. Hugo also tells him to relax. After all, he always got really nervous or had dreams when they went to see his mother. And Nona comes up with an idea. Now that he was awake, she'll give him his birthday present. She said he needed a divine artifact that can store the magic power of Gemini. So his dad and she bought it for him. She was happy because he was so glad, and he was always sad on his birthday. Nona tells him he always had to be happy, so his mother wouldn't feel sad. Hugo says nothing, just grips the steering wheel tighter with rage in room 808. Chum Chiwa Nona. He's telling stories about what happened over these last few days, about her uncle, the battle, and everything else. She was super excited to tell him everything, but she'd say more once his mother woke up. Hugo with his head down, and just like that, outside the door, a call to the shadows. Today was a big day for him and his family. That's why he wanted to avoid any business deals. But the countries of the European alliance were looking for him. It was a simple disaster extermination. He asks if Virgo wasn't nearby since he was the strongest, but they wouldn't be calling him. If it weren't a total emergency, Virgo had already refused any combat with that calamity. In fact, it was one of the deadliest calamities. He had already run into it in the past. It was the same one that 10 years ago had destroyed the airport, the Blood Toad. In the national jurisdiction of the EU, Virgo Belgium Jian was talking to Sunji about becoming his disciple, but he couldn't. He thinks that deal was going to be tough. He was apologizing. He thinks maybe he didn't know his nephew that well. They hadn't even told him it was his birthday. They seemed to be hiding something. Something must have happened on his birthday, and right then, a praiser, Kim Jong, arrives. He had used a portal to reach Virgo City. He asks why it was Virgo City. First off, he explains that Europe was always culturally influenced by religion. After the appearance of the saints and the rise of the guild system taking root in the world, Europe would turn into a massive theocracy, and you could see it in every dome that protects them everywhere. Their faith must be rock solid, but let's get to the point. He created a soundproof barrier and shows him the data from the dagger that stabbed him 20 years ago. He managed to capture some memories that remained within it, and after investigating the memory fragments, the culprit who stabbed him was Kevin. The Virgo Saint in Hugo House asks the fairy, Larry Queen, to investigate because he is a high. He rejected his offer to join his squad. He must have been plotting something. He was still in Gemini, and he had already lost all faith. After a few minutes, Sanjay arrives to ask him a favor. He was in luck. He could get the information out. In exchange for that favor, he asks her to open the teleportation portal for him to the secret Gemini library. We are told that the Gemini library was a place where forbidden books existed that only high saints could read. The last time, he threw away his badge, so it was very hard for him to enter. He must find out something extremely important to him. She accepts, but he had to tell her all his intentions, without lying about what he wanted to find. It was the spirit summoning ability to allow the summoning of beings from other worlds. The scene changes. Jian is at a train station, thinking about the dagger's statement. But he knows that there was a powerful, evil being involved strong enough to harm not only a saint, but a divine god. It could even be Lois, but he couldn't attack the gods. He was convinced that the jerk who stabbed him was deeply connected to the disasters of the unknown civilization. He needed to get his strength back as soon as possible to take him on, and they finally arrived. The elite troops of the Saint of Hugo Otters are now located inside the catastrophe area, burning and wiping out the small calamities. They ask what those branches were. They made walking difficult. Zhang thinks it was a coincidence. He didn't expect them to be bargaining with Virgo. What brought them there? They had come at the request of Sagittarius. They received a commission to handle the disasters, and the Hugo Saint went to meet with the European government to provide a detailed explanation of what they were planning to do. He had accepted the job because of the special circumstances the monster that craved the powers of all the saints. They ask him if he had never heard about the blood mist monster at the political headquarters of the European Fiscal Department. They explain the situation to Hugo. The calamity appeared 10 days ago. Virgo had already made a move, but his forces were wiped out. Furthermore, Lord Virgo was dealing with a similar threat in the ocean. That's why they were looking for help from other divine squads, and he and his friend were the best fit for the job, and no one else was available. Hugo thinks it's an obvious trick. The Virgo Saint knew they would accept. They just had to mention the calamity, blood mist, and Gion would never turn down that job from... They tell Gion that the wife of his chosen one died because of the red mist. She tried to protect her son. Both she and his first disciple died. Divine Squad Captain Li Gwen. Gion knew that guy. He was the one who helped them carry gear 20 years ago. Now he understood why. He avoided talking about his wife. He never imagined that something like that could have happened. Truth be told, the Hugo he knew wasn't like this. He knew how skilled he was, since he taught him how to fight. Back in his prime, he would have trusted him blindly. That Hugo from the past was one of the strongest among the 12 saints. They ask him to explain every detail he had shared with him. Hugo, they agree, but it wasn't easy to talk about it, but since it's him, they're going to tell him. That horrible incident happened 10 years ago, on the 7th birthday of Sunjae. In the past, the redhead and his mother, Chun Hee-wong, a member on Sagittarius's watch, were at the airport, and Lee Jae-won was there too. The first disciple of Sagittarius, Sunjae asks for some food, so Lee Jae-won goes to buy some. While waiting, he overhears two brothers arguing about a mistake they had made, but they run off because they didn't want to die. The mother is about to tell them to leave, but a massive shadow appears right before their eyes. Everything goes dark at the airport and a red mist starts rising from the ground. The mother grabs her son and tells Jae-won that what was happening was really bad news. The first disciple drops the food bags on the floor, and the calamity lunges without hesitation to devour the mother and her son, but a shove saves her life. Lee Jae-won had given his life to save them, and even on his deathbed, he gives a thumbs up and smiles as a sign that everything was going to be okay. Seeing what happened, the mother runs off to save her son. The scene was brutal. Many were dead. Others were wounded, screaming for help, and the mother was begging her son to hide until his father arrived. Until then, he should wait bravely for his father. She asks him to promise her, and a vine grabs her knee and captures her in the mind of Hanwei. He could only think of telling her a bunch of stories. He cried, asking for forgiveness, and branches were closing in to snatch him too. Then a flash of fire shows up on the scene. It was Hugo asking if he was okay. He was fine, but his mother wasn't. He realized it. He managed to spot his wife and calm down. There might still be a way to be able to save her. He tries to pull her out, but the spirits of his friend and his wife appear begging for help. It freezes him cold. He loses all touch with reality, and a branch pierces through his ribs. The calamity smiles and sucks away his celestial power, but the saints burst onto the scene. They were there to help them. The three of them attack with their most powerful moves, but the calamity had the ability to swallow magic. Thanks to that, it could regenerate itself. The calamity strikes. Its attack was devastating. It could even shatter the barrier. They were in deep trouble. But a fifth chosen one appears using branches of the Golden Rule. The Gemini Saint begs them to use teleportation. This calamity was way too strong, and even with all four of them together, they couldn't take it down. They had to send it anywhere else. Hugo screams that they couldn't do that. The souls of everyone there wouldn't be saved, and he could still fight. She was reaching her limit. The barrier wouldn't hold much longer. She demands that he cast the spell. There was no more time, and he agrees. Hugo desperately yells for them not to do it. That day, every media outlet and every person slammed Hugo and only praised the other saints, but on the flip side, Sagittarius, who had been protecting Korea, was trashed by the citizens. It wasn't just that he didn't stop the disaster, but there were more casualties than necessary because of Hugo's actions. Rumors started spreading that he chose to save his family over other people, that he was way too selfish. Hugo made a public apology, but his country didn't buy it. They came out and slammed him over and over again. They called him every name in the book. Their relatives had died because of him. They are gathered, these four, and we're told that the calamity had absorbed half of Hugo's strength. The people kept bashing him all the way to the hospital. His subordinates tell him he didn't need to shoulder all the blame by himself. He fought too and lost a lot. After the disaster, he couldn't just stay quiet. He had to tell what really happened. He had to tell them that if they hadn't teleported the calamity away, they could have saved the souls. He replies that if there was a way to save them, they didn't die. Their souls were just ripped out. They just had to capture the red mist and get the souls back, but at that moment, he was weak. Even half of his powers were taken away. No one who was there could have defeated it. They yell at him that if he left things like this, they were going to hate him forever. But he says that it was okay to blame him. He couldn't keep the promise he made to John to protect Korea. He can't say a word. It didn't matter what the criticisms were or how much they hated him. He knows everything was frustrating, but he needs to suck it up and take it. He thanks her for the concern. The captain calms her down. She explains that Hugo had taken the victims to the hospital because he still had faith they would wake up. When Hugo is about to open the door, his son can be heard apologizing to his mother, that it was his fault. They had stayed longer at the airport because of him. Because of him, she and his uncle were in that state. He begs for forgiveness, over and over again. Hugo breaks down in tears for the first time, rolling down his cheeks. Now he was recounting what happened in that moment. He should have told his son it wasn't his fault. But he couldn't show him that he was also broken. He believes that Sunjae still thinks he's the one to blame. Jian tells the captain to let him cry. When he talked, it was annoying. Either way, now that the blood mist has reappeared, they need to settle old scores. This time he's going to wipe it out completely. As for the frog, she says that the remaining powers of the sun god came on their own accord. Now it's going to swallow everyone in the city and him too. Hugo claims they had to burn all the calamities, and his subjects were acting very friendly. They gave him many gifts, but it was clearly because he had told his story to John. The voice of Rena reaches him, informing him she just spoke with Young-jae and will tell him what happened. From the redhead's perspective, what he wanted to find was the spirit call. The spirit call is an ability that can summon beings from other worlds to manifest. For that reason, he wanted to save his mother and his uncle. He wanted to bring back all the people who, because of him, had been sacrificed in the library. He was going to donate the bracelet, so the book would grant him the knowledge. He was looking for the page to find the incantation, but the blonde guy appears. Again, he won't let him talk to the dead. It was John Siwo saying he only thought he was important because he had Gaon on his side, but at that moment, he was alone and told him to look at his father and uncle. They were desperate, showing him a vision of the scene Hugo was signaling the retreat for today. The captain notifies Group 1 and Group 2, but Group 3 didn't respond, and a "please help me" can be heard. John asks him to calm down. He was too worked up now. He had to stay cool for the battle. He will get his revenge after 10 long years, and lasso-like branches shoot out from the ground. The frog attacks, but John manages to stop it, asking if it was the one who had hurt his nephew and his friend. He realizes immediately that this calamity was dangerous. Jian thinks it has massive ambitions, generating its leg. It looks like it intended to devour both humans and cities, but they were there to ruin its meal. Today they would rip its stomach open from side to side. Hugo shouts that the combined attacks were being effective. Everyone had to prepare. The second wave of arrows, they had arrows made of banana. The frog tries to attack the archers, but they dodge. John thinks the roots were a nuisance. He asks Lime for scissors. He's going to do some pruning that deals a lot of damage to the frog. In fact, he shreds it and kills it for good. They think they couldn't see how strong he was. Jean the redhead shouts that they won, but John Siwo thinks it was a tough scenario. But that calamity could eat up all the powers around it, giving it the order to regenerate. The frog regenerated, just like a Titan from Attack on Titan. They realized the dome covering the city was surrounded by blood mist. Gion realizes the frog had penetrated the dome with its roots underground. The general orders them to raise their bows again while Gamabunta, the blonde guy, scoffs. Now the frog could devour the city completely. What was once a refuge for people was now a magic battery for the blood mist. There were way more people than at the airport. He couldn't wait to see the show. That would go down. The redhead can't believe it. He remembers the two brothers talking in the past and realizes that one of the brothers was John Siwo. The blonde guy laughs. How could he take so long to find out? He says that his father was an idiot. He didn't realize it was all a trap set by his mother to destroy his credibility. He calls him out, saying that many people were murdered that day. He didn't feel a shred of guilt, but he just responds that they simply had bad luck. The redhead attacks Jan. Dude thinks he was going to bring his uncle back again, trying to scare him, but it was the same strategy. But with a twist, now he shows up himself, hitting him with all his might. Stunning him, he knocks the relic out of his hand. He revived Gamabunta with that artifact. He should be able to use it to take him out. Because of that, he teleports. Meanwhile, elite forces fire thousands of arrows. The frog defends itself, and Gion uses his pruning skill. He gets cocky with his amazing slash, and an arm is ripped from his body. Hugo appears to defend him. Gion unleashes his power in one hit, but it does nothing. Thanks to the divine red eye skill, 20 years ago in the Devil's Tower, we are told that those calamities with that power were insanely stronger than red-level calamities. They were almost impossible to attack. They came from hell itself. Gion activates his skill to see enemy weaknesses and realizes that there were 3 cores, but the most dangerous core was hidden. It was the one providing power, based on souls. They realize they were using the dome as a power source. He orders his forces to destroy the city's dome, but the calamity won't let them. It traps them and steals their souls again. Suffering souls begin to scream for salvation, shocking everyone there. John, he thinks he knew exactly how to push his opponent's buttons, and a portal appears inside the dome. It was the redhead. He realizes that a blood tree was right before his eyes. It was a tree exhaling red mist. It was all the fault of that tree activating its power, magically. On TV, they show the events. The bloody mist that had appeared 10 years ago was back again. It was taking the lives of many. It wasn't even possible for the rescue teams to enter. The death toll from this event couldn't even be estimated. No one could do a thing. No divine squad could stand up to that monstrosity. But one person can be seen, though they don't report who it is, because a branch smashes the drone. Jian could only dodge the branches, and Hugo is hit. His divine relic is destroyed, and he's slammed into the ground. Jian thinks about helping him, but Soul's in pain. Beg for help once more, throwing him off balance. He thinks that trick was definitely dirty. The calamity grabs him, drags him through the building, and sends him underground with its power. Looking at the archers, it tells them all that they were next. But then pain is inflicted upon it. Someone was dealing damage to its ship. The redhead lands his best blows. Because of this, innocent people, his uncle and mother, were in a coma. The calamity, sensing danger, jumps to save its core, but Hugo calls for his ship and sets his plan B in motion, and a pillar-sized arrow pierces the beast. He activated his relic, the arsenal arrow of the white soldiers. He thought one arrow wouldn't be enough, so he carefully prepared the others. He fires arrows to pin its body to the ground, and his archers throw ropes to immobilize it, but they couldn't withstand the massive power that the calamity possessed. They know they can't defeat him, but they can hold him back. As for Yanwei, he attacks with rage and teary eyes. He manages to break the tree, and the city's barrier. Blood Mist laments for his city. His power source had been destroyed. The souls that were bound to the tree trunk were disappearing. Yang Wei was waking up. He had passed out, but the tree was already broken, which made him very happy. Now he can see the sky. He did it. But a roar of fire echoes in the distance. The city had melted away. The subjects didn't know what had happened. A huge explosion had occurred, and their saint had protected them. The calamity was using the power of Sagittarius that it took 10 years ago. It glares at the one responsible for breaking its tree. Hugo couldn't believe his son was in that situation. He realizes that he had broken the dome. The calamity will definitely chew him up and eat him alive. The calamity would finish taking the other half of his power. Hugo resists, but an evil aura of unknown origin was trapping him. It seals Yang Wei in a capsule to protect him. Gamabunta laughs, having finally swallowed all the power of the sun god, and a sword rises from the ground. The calamity feels ready to face him. Now it has all the remaining power of the sun god. But Gion shouts that it's not over yet. From the perspective of Hugo, he feels his entire body go numb. At the end of it all, he achieved nothing. He couldn't save his wife, his friend, or his son. He couldn't even get revenge on that damn red mist. He thinks this is the end, but he catches a glimpse of a light. He sees the power fragment that had been taken from him before. His power was right in front of his eyes, but there was nothing he could do about it. His memory was becoming a blur. He wondered what he was even fighting for, and a memory of his family flashes before him. It was a scene where they had taken a photo. Everyone had turned out great that day. He opens his eyes. He won't go down like that. He won't end up embarrassing his family. He can't give up. He has to reach him. He tells himself again he has to reach him. His body wasn't going to hold out any longer. Then a shadow of light appears. It was Jian shouting his name. He still had a lot of work to do. He had to take his hand 30 years ago in Arabia. Hugo was running from a calamity that ends up eating him. He thought that was it. He regretted it because he never even got married. But his friend showed up to save him. It was always like that. Whenever he was in trouble, his help would arrive. Yanwei begs his father to wake up. Gion scans him and realizes his friend's power was fully restored. He tells him not to worry about his father. He'd be more than okay. And he goes on the offensive. Against the calamity, he's going to take care of it. He rants that because of it, his friend was looked down on by everyone, and his nephew never got to have a birthday. All he had to do was shatter its core. The calamity is in trouble. It had to retreat to the underworld or it would die, but it still had some strength left to kill the son and the father. It's defeated, but it'll seize their power once more. Jian yells that it was dead wrong. Hugo might be an idiot, but he was a supremely powerful being. Reporters in the distance wonder what was happening. A massive pillar of fire erupted from the ruins. It was midnight 1 second, but suddenly everything was bright as day. Nona was watching it all go down, and Haley says it's been a long time coming. But his father had regained all of his power. The calamity screams it had to give back the power. Hugo uses celestial flare. That skill burned away everything impure. John wanted to take his life himself, but he won't be the one to finish him. Swaps places with Hugo, and with a smile on his face, he tells him to end him. Hugo remembers everything that happened, his son crying, feeling guilty about his mother's death. But he tells him no, it wasn't his fault. After the explosion, Jian thinks that caused too much of a mess. But now, really, they destroyed everything. The cores and bodies were reduced to ashes. They couldn't do anything else. Hugo thanks Jian, who replies that the guy he knows would never thank him. But for today, he'll accept it. And by the way, he found something while they were fighting that thing. He found the soul core. He thinks that was the thing that kept the souls. He uses the snake skill and breaks the spiritual seal he was, releasing the souls that thing had devoured. Now the people who had been consumed could wake up one by one. Yang Wei asks if it was really possible. Jian replies, when those souls return to their respective bodies, they will wake up. His mother will too. He heard her birthday was recently. It was a bit late, but happy birthday. From Stephen Marker's perspective, he is defeating the Kraken. He feeds it with his super bone. He takes it for a walk. He goes on adventures. But he returns to reality and wakes up. He asks all his subjects who were going to attack Jian and Capricorn, but they had to bring his super bone. They get angry. They couldn't believe he was still obsessed with the bone. They were going to put him to sleep again. Then someone shouts, it was a miracle. The people who had been asleep because of the red mist for 10 years, everyone was waking up. They were regaining consciousness. The news is reporting on the event. Reports were coming in that thousands of people were waking up. They were on the outskirts of the protection dome, Western, and after a tough battle, the hero Li Jian and the Sagittarius Force have defeated the blood mist. They couldn't describe what happened. This event was unprecedented in modern times. It was expected that those who hadn't woken up yet would do so soon. The older blonde watches the news. He hadn't just lost blood mist, he also lost the rosary. It was a total disaster. He understood why they were beaten, but he couldn't let himself be beaten by such a weak guy. Now they'll be exposed to people's gossip. They had to eliminate any trace of them. They had to go to the hospital to capture Yan. Wei Hugo is told that his wife was still asleep, but it's expected that she'll wake up soon. Jian asks the redhead to go to his mother. Yang Wei asks his father if he was going to go too. Hugo starts to cry because his son was worrying about him. Hugo makes a very long speech, but he couldn't go since he had things to do. The redhead accepts and leaves. At the hospital, he thinks he'll finally see his mother, but first he had to go buy flowers. He couldn't show up empty-handed. The older blonde thinks about where that brat could be and how a hospital could keep trash in bed for 10 years. In the European Union, they were interviewing the Archer forces, and Jian was at a bar. He was analyzing another piece of the dagger from that unknown civilization. It was in the core's shell. All the evidence pointed to Virgo being responsible. It wasn't very clear, but the answers will definitely come to light. He tells Hugo that now they'll capture Virgo, but he asks him to rest for a bit. Not everyone was as tough as him, Gian says. They're so weak nowadays. Back in my day, they didn't even have a chance to breathe. Before they attacked me, he asks him why. He hadn't followed his son, and Hugo didn't think he could look his wife and his friend in the eye, and he still had a lot of work to do. They had problems with Virgo and problems with Libra. They have to find the culprit who caused all of this. He tells the forces that they can now go back to Korea. They weren't needed. They were too much of a hassle. Everyone had to go back, except for that guy. They had sent Sunjay alone, he was sure. It was full of guys who were going to be looking for him. Hugo panics, but Jian calms him down. He had given him a coin. That would come in handy very soon. It was a birthday present. Yang Wei, walking along, sees the families. He was very happy, and by his side, someone had activated their powers and attacks him. He tries to defend himself with his shield, asking them to stand down. They were in a hospital. He remarks that he had improved quite a bit. If he could block an attack at A level, but he attacks him again and smashes the whole floor of the building. Meanwhile, at the office of Virgo, the saint of Virgo himself arrives, demanding answers. Kevin Hazard, he was humanity's strongest prosecutor, a crescent moon agent, an icy silver knight, commander of the Glacial Cold Corp. His Virgo cluster was worthy of admiration. He was presumed to have an incomparable power scale. The only bad thing about Kevin Hazard was his massive ego. He wanted them to explain what had happened in his city. Jian was all over the news. That should be him. He was like that because it was due to the fact that he never had won a competition against Gian. Jian was always the one who landed the final blow. He was the one in the interviews. He even beat him at karaoke. I think the guy there is his friend is really good. This time he's going to take him down with his own hands. The office worker gives the orders to enter the bar, that he had already arrived. Everyone shouts not to move, but a blast of music stuns them. It was Hugo and his forces singing to the beat. The Virgo general yells at them that they were an embarrassment to the divine cadres, and Jian punches her. They should shut up. They were ruining the show. She argues that they were orders from the office worker. But this guy in a cape appears, tells him he had little time, apologizes for the actions of his subordinates, but he needed his help. He was the head of the Virgo sanctuary, asks him to please get rid of Kevin. Hazard, the saint of his own, divine cadre. As for Kevin, he was looking for Jian with his ability, but his mind was wandering. He realizes something and breaks the office worker's glasses. He was the one to blame for his mind wandering. He was wasting his time. It was a Scorpio ability, asks him one more time, where Jian was. Based on his answer, he'll see if his life is spared or not in the Virgo sanctuary. Jian was tearing it apart. The head of the sanctuary thinks that was for the best. His Virgo group at that moment was split in two. It was a complete tyranny, and he needed help to overthrow him. As a reward, he's going to give him the consecration of piercing. That was the master weapon that Jian used 20 years ago. All the subjects within the Virgo sanctuary had fallen, and the sanctuary gate opens and a halt is heard. It was Kevin Hazard, the saint of Virgo. He says he's glad to see someone so strong. Jian thought the same. 20 years had passed. He never thought that waiting at the top, it was so nice. There was Hugo and the bastard who had betrayed him. It was nice, wiping them out in one go, they ask. Who had made their vassal god look like that? That was another reason to take him down. But Hugo breaks the attack and says he'll have to fight him first. Since Gion was still wasted, Hugo thinks he did it. Jian makes a call. He's in front of the holy relics of Kevin's sanctuary, and they were about to have a fight. And Gion tells them to get out of the way. He was about to give him what he wanted. He's happy and finally steps forward. He tells his allies to stay out of it. It was a battle for adults only. Then Gion surprises him. He was losing his touch. Hazard had blocked his attack and a chill ran through his blood, and the relic was unable to withstand the cold. As a result, it breaks. He dodges his attacks and pulls out his hammer, parrying the attack and kicking him. After that, they had to get serious. Gion remarks that it's been a long time since he saw that sword. It was the binary relic, Winter Frost. He asks Gion how he's going to move now. The Winter Frost had frozen all his limbs. Without realizing it, he had let his guard down. He was much weaker than 20 years ago. Attacking him, there was nowhere to escape, but Gion switches bodies, and the traitor is run through by the saint's sword. Gion was getting fed up with his crap, so he smashes him with the hammer, hitting a home run, and as he hits him, a wall falls. It was the heavenly condemnation. He thinks he's done for. Hugo, to put it simply, it was contradictory. The man who betrayed Gion in the tower, Demon Tower. He was betrayed by one of his own subordinates, but he hadn't betrayed anyone. Hugo yells at him not to lie. He had stabbed Gion in the Demon Tower and set a trap, but he snaps back for him to stop talking nonsense and to shut up. He couldn't frame him for something like that, firing his sword. But the sanctuary leader stops him and binds his arm. It was an absolute order, using the skill of Libra. Since it had come to this, he'd have to get rid of everyone. He uses the Libra skill and swaps the Virgo Saint's body, but Kevin uses his skill and cuts off his own arm to break free. He laughs. The look on his face before cutting his arm was one of a kind, all to avoid becoming tribute for the Holy Spirit. But that was enough. His arm was also very valuable. Everyone tries to stop him, but it was already too late. Everyone was welcome to the unknown space. Gion had already experienced that vibe of dark and nasty energy. The sanctuary leader explains to them that this was a glimpse of hell. They would dig their graves in that place. The allies try to avenge their saint, but they can't use their skills. Your saints, and everyone present, have lost connection with their zodiac saint. That space was a place of power isolation. From Libra, they couldn't use saint powers there. Gion tries to get close, but arms from the ground grab him. Those arms weren't just arms. He shouts that he doesn't remember it. They were the things he had fought for 20 years, the ones that brought him to the brink of death. Gion realized they weren't like the red mist that was forcibly summoned. They were true disasters that were in the Demon Tower. At the hospital, they were beating the crap out of Yang Wei. That was the difference between an S-Class and an A-Class. No matter what he does, he'll never be able to do anything against him. The redhead sees that it was his mother's piece. He strikes and sends him and his mother flying out of the building with a single attack. As he and his mother go into a free fall, he remembers that no one can help him, not even his sister or his father. He didn't know what to do, but he couldn't do anything. He had no... On a left, he was very weak, but he had to react. He was the only one who could do something. Holding his mother, his uncle, and his father. Never gave up, and neither would he. He'll do it. He'll protect her, even if it costs him his life. And Ophiuchus welcomes his indomitable spirit, asking he wanted his power. He accepts he'll do whatever it takes, just to save his mother. The blonde is surprised, seeing that he still had a little bit of mana left, and as for Jiun and the others, they were all trapped by the hands. He had designed this plan for a long time, and it was finally working. To think he put so much effort in for some roaches. On that level, it was a shame that he couldn't use his skills. Jian thought he talked too much. He would never give up in a situation like this. Even when he fought while they were destroying his body, he never thought of giving up. Even when he wandered through the demon tower all alone for 20 years, he never thought of giving up. He was a pathetic lunatic, make no mistake. That wasn't even close to a disaster. He thinks he was just showing off and attacks him with dozens of arms. On Yang Wei's side, he lands a powerful blow on the blonde. He told him to give up, but he would never give up. He couldn't. His mother and his uncle were his responsibility now. It was his turn to defend them. He will protect them with his own hands. A notification appears on the screen. He has passed the test. The first disciple is born. The first Ophiuchus saint has been born. That makes him use a skill from the Bible of God, which lets him write verses of his own story. His massive power shatters the barrier of hell. He'd like to handle it himself, but first, he had to go get his weapon. He breaks all the chains with just raw strength. That feeling, he'll never forget it. Even though 20 years have passed, she was heaven's punishment. Double S rank. The 8th artifact and his masterpiece. He proclaims that his weapon hasn't eaten in 20 years, so he had to feed it. Now he wanted to hear him talk. Hadn't he said that even bugs squirm when they're stepped on? He was different, for never giving up. But what about him? Will he give up or fight like a man? He asks his saint to stop them, but Jian fights back. He was happy. It had been a long time since he last fought with his awesome weapon. Thanks to breaking the hell barrier, everyone's powers returned. July meteor. Celestial splendor. The forces of Virgo and Sagittarius were back in the fight, but George shouts that the pose sucked. He couldn't believe they had gotten away with it. He had to get out of there. But the saint of Virgo seeks revenge for his right arm. But something strange comes out to defend him. A sinister voice appears. It was Jean-Louis Morin. He had some urgent business. He'll offer up his trader as a tribute, creating a mini-armed beast. Jian still thinks that it felt very powerful, so he uses his skill with his recovered sword. From the perspective of the carver, he sees a giant explosion in the pile of rubble. They think he was only able to use 85% of his strength. He doesn't know how much harder he has to push to use 100. The Virgo saint thought he was a crazy bastard. He had completely wiped out his sanctuary in a temple. Jean-Louis explains that his mission had failed. He just did the best he could. The Libra saint throws him to the ground with a spell. She hopes that next time he succeeds in such a simple mission. On the other hand, Kevin tells them that Scorpion was the one who stabbed him. But Hugo couldn't believe his words. Allie, it couldn't be. They had checked all the records of the daggers from the unknown civilization. He thinks the dagger they mention looks familiar. He investigated and then he found it. He found those 5 objects while investigating Scorpion. Each one was linked to an unknown civilization. He says that the beings from Scorpion were dangerous. They were close to beings that threatened humanity. Nona appears saying she doesn't believe that's true. They had said that it was Scorpion, but she had already been to the Scorpion Sanctuary before coming here. Hallie helped her in many ways and seemed like a good person. It was too soon to jump to those conclusions. Kevin yells in shock, asking him what kind of place the Scorpion Sanctuary was, and Gion's stomach growls, so they're going to eat something first. Gion was getting annoyed. He couldn't control his strength. Kevin calls him out on how he could act like such a child, and he also calls out Hugo on how he could raise his kids like that. The MC notices that he had become much stronger. Thanks to the fight, Hugo looks happy about his revenge, and it's his turn now too. And Nona hands him something that Hallie had given her. It was one of his 8 relics. He remembers that she used to run away every time she saw him. He wonders why she had that. He used to think she hated him. That weapon was in league with the unknown civilization. Hazard confirms that he was right. Scorpion was connected to the unknown civilization, plus he saw him as a target back in the day. Scorpion used to poison his food. She had to be the one behind it. The appraiser wanted to see that bottle. Hugo tells Hazard to hand it over. They think they were being very rude for doubting him. The appraiser thinks what happened was disgraceful. The Inquisition had conspired with another saint, and they were manipulated. Not to mention they took control of the tower. He even manipulated the troops. Gian explains that the info they got made them suspect Virgo. They were so thorough. All the clues pointed toward Virgo. They were so obvious that the answer was questionable. He didn't know if the one who stabbed him had white hair, since he only had memories of the dagger. But since that wasn't the case, he had to rule out the other suspects, Libra, Cancer, and Scorpio. Now he was certain that Kevin wasn't the one who stabbed him. He loved being the center of attention, but he couldn't do something like that. He's thinking about visiting Scorpio. He was sure she's involved in this. He's also curious about the gift she sent him. Besides, he made Sanjay a saint, but it'll take time to see him again. Hugo asks what he just said. He confirms that Sunjay was his first saint. Nona right behind him calls him out, asking why she wasn't chosen. But then she thinks she just had to tell her brother to quit and give her the spot. As soon as the redhead had finally defeated him, a doctor thinks it was incredible. Thanks to him, it had ended easily. With Taewo, the director of Gemini complains to him that he couldn't just steal that grimoire like that. There are things in the world he couldn't understand. He says he could take it, that he didn't need it anymore. But they can't leave things. Like that he had many questions. Besides, he had betrayed Gemini. He had to go with them. And a person in bed also hears those words. Sunjay thinks he was acting like that again, without considering anyone else's point of view, and just forcing through whatever he wanted. He wouldn't keep putting up with their crap. They try to perform a summoning by stripping the power from Sunjay, but something was happening. It was a massive amount of energy, and thanks to that, they summoned the strongest of their summons. Helishian, the first fairy king. The king says that they had summoned him, but the boy's aura was what really brought him here. Seeing the sheer amount of power, the boy as he thinks about switching religions. But that couldn't be possible. He was the fairy king, an authority of Gemini, but he thinks he has lost connection with the Holy Spirit of Gemini, and he doesn't even know where they went. It didn't seem like much to swear his loyalty to. They give up and think about attacking Sunjay themselves. He uses his abilities. He was ready to fight, but he had run out of serpent energy because the fairy had devoured all of his energy. He asks him to do something to defend him then, but he didn't have any life contract. They didn't have a relationship yet. The director laughs at his victory. But the wall collapses. The director only manages to see a shadow approaching him, and he's hit by a massive blow. The guy yells out, wondering who dared to threaten his dear Sunjay. It was J1, the former leader of the Sagittarius Divine Squad, but there were only 2 of them. They were nothing against his forces. They had them outnumbered. But with an epic entrance, the Sagittarius forces burst onto the scene. They had to surrender. Before they got a hole blasted in their heads, a portal opens and they're told to retreat immediately. The grimoire plan had been a failure. And right before his eyes, Sunjay had the person who had sacrificed their life for him. A lot of time had passed. He used to only come up to his waist, and now he was at eye level. He didn't know where to start, but he was so happy that he was finally awake. The king now notices the book, and an angry voice is heard telling him not to play dumb. She knew that Uncle Gion had become a saint, and the uncle appears to tell him he was right there. The fairy king says that he was even more nervous than when he was surrounded by Gemini's forces. He tells him he should escape and transfer him to his divine squad, and he jumps off the building to escape Nona. He had let her be born first, so now he couldn't let her be the saint. And as he hits the ground, he hears, "Nona Sunjay, my children. How have you been?" It was their mother. Later at the teleportation transit station, there were Gion Kevin, the Gemini captain, and Hugo, who was crying. They had informed him that his wife had woken up. She hadn't fully recovered, but she was doing well. They also tell him that they had driven out the Sagittarius force and Taewo had disappeared. They had found the culprits from 10 years ago. It was Joe Taewo and John Siwo, the 2 saints of the Libra children. The captain says that in the past, Hugo had figured all of that out. He confronted her about whether his children were the ones to blame for the incident. She just thought he couldn't do anything at his level as a half-saint. She would talk with her kids and punish them for what happened, but he was the one at fault for not having prevented that disaster. In any case, he was the one who failed to save Korea. He had 2 options: reveal the truth, defeat the calamity, save his wife and the citizens of Korea. But if he told them everything that happened and didn't defeat the calamity, she would take care of her children. If he remembered correctly, they were named Nona and Sunjay. He had to choose. For that reason, Hugo couldn't do anything back then. He was the one most affected by the events, and he asks him to do whatever it takes to find his siblings. We are told that the real reason Sunjay and Nona were in other divine squads was to ensure the safety of those 2, and now that he thinks about it, his disciple must have some mission, and John needed an adult to complete some tasks. He asks Hugo if he wanted to pray at his altar and become an adult. The Sagittarius saint gets angry. He couldn't touch his contractor Kevin. He asks John if he wanted to join his divine squad, since his own was complete garbage. The captain says he tried to convince Nona to join his divine squad. It was their destiny to be together, but she completely ignores him. Nona also tells them that if they went to Scorpio, it was very difficult to use the normal routes, the sea and air routes. The sea and air routes were blocked by the unknown civilization. That's why the right route was through Leo's. When their negotiations were over, he would go see them. He tells them both that he saw how they fought against the Blood Mist. Both of them had been awesome. Gion thinks he raised his kids well, and Hugo agrees that no matter how hard it was, seeing his kids' happy faces was priceless. Then he sees his captain looking strange. Did he have some dark feelings for his daughter, since he wasn't answering? And in the end, everyone ends up fighting. Kevin was also going to prove his innocence, and once they defeated everyone, to swoop in, save them, and bask in the glory, they were ready to head to the coordinates for Washington, D.C., United States, at a table. Several people from Leo's squad were gathered. They think they should give a proper welcome to the guests coming to visit them, part of the arena, the festival. And now I know English. A few hours ago in Washington, D.C., they were admiring a statue that was clearly massive, and Kevin wanted the same one. He should build one just like it for himself and a group of people. He asks them to please follow him. Gio tells them to get lost. He wasn't there for them, but they ask him to calm down. They came to hand him an invitation to a legendary battle. This event was one of a kind. It was simply to select the strongest. They wanted to produce a unique fight between him and his saint. As for Stephen, they tell him that they had prepared a match for him against Lee John. He does. Not long ago, he had lost to him because of an unfair attack. But everyone knows that 30 years ago, he beat him, and luckily, they had just confirmed that Lee John had accepted the Leo Saint. Couldn't believe it. Gene backstage. Before the event, the captain tells him that the event was a success. The Coliseum was packed, and the broadcast was breaking viewership records. Stephen looks at the stage and goes to the bathroom where he finds the MC. He tells him to take it easy. A dead man wouldn't do anything to him, and Stephen tells his story. 20 years ago, his death was very hard on him. Back then, he was the symbol of humanity, and humanity was plunged into sadness the day he died. It can be tough, but also without that sadness, he wouldn't have had the chance to take over his name and proclaim himself the strongest man. It was to maintain order. He managed to make humanity believe in something so they wouldn't fall apart, but John thinks he had drifted off topic. He says that arena was just entertainment. There was no need to fight, just a show, so he wouldn't prefer a tie. As for the arena, the announcer, ladies and gentlemen, today, we will witness a legendary battle. Who will be the winner of the tournament? Stephen stays calm. Lee John had promised to cooperate. John had changed the rules. They had proposed facing off against all the combatants. Stephen thinks that was the MC's plan to say that he couldn't beat them because he was up against so many people, and thus transform the fight into an all-star exhibition. With that approach, everyone could be a winner. And the announcer continues, he will show the video of the match between Gian and Stephen Marker from 30 years ago. Stephen didn't want them to show that video. The MC asks if he was pissed, and for him to tell everyone that he had used a video program. The Leo Saint yells that he had just paid $50 billion to use it. And with that, the battle begins. Everyone goes after the MC. Hugo is left speechless by what he had paid, and Kevin couldn't stand watching them fight just like that. He was going to join the battle, too. Hugo and the captain had to stop him. The Leo squad thinks that their allies couldn't interfere in the fight, and since those present had placed bets, they couldn't let the Leo group get into the mix due to an unexpected situation. The entire arena crowd jumped in to start, throwing hands on the stream. Everyone was dying laughing. In the VIP section, they had to stop things. And the director, Oliver, who had plotted this event, meets Nona. She mentions that he had never used honorifics with her before, asks whose it really was. Meanwhile, in the battle royale, George tells Stephen to show himself, swinging like a maniac. And now it was his turn. The Leo Saint sets his cowardice aside and activates his power, attacking with all his might. And Gian punches him in the face, then hits him again and again and again and again. Stephen thinks he's going to get killed, but Kevin shows up to make them fight him too. Then an explosion is heard. It was Nona, demanding the reveal of the true identity, and it was Sylvia, one of the 10 chosen by Pisces. Those present are shocked to see that Oliver was a woman. Kevin thinks they're stealing his spotlight, and right next to him was a person run through by his sword. He claims it's not what they think. He didn't mean to. Then a voice says it was weird. How the hell did John know it was him? He had a sharp eye. Recognizing that arrogant voice, it was Libra. She thinks it was to be expected from the owner of this divine seat competing with her. That was incredible. Kevin says his hidden motives were obvious. He asks Gian how he survived that tower. He didn't expect to see his face ever again. Looking at him, he admits he was strong, asking Kevin why he hadn't finished off. John's heart for sure. He couldn't give excuses. Everyone knew he'd done it. The crab, the fish, and the goat knew, but it went up in flames. Hugo says not to be fooled by their words, getting disappointed in Hugo. His strength was supposed to be back, yet he's unable to burn that body and thinks Kevin's sword needs to be sharper to hurt him than when he stabbed John 20 years ago. Kevin didn't get why he couldn't pierce a guy who was just a puppet. It must be because of the God's mark. That was a special contract, granted by the favorite Holy Spirit. That meant that this puppet was on par with Giselle Lorenz. John appears to deliver an overhead sword strike, but that couldn't do a thing to him. Whoever had the mark of God, or so they thought. John shouts that his expression had changed. The Libra saint is worried. Someone thinks it was a mistake to bring John in and try to kick out the saint of Leo. She feels that if it weren't for Kevin, her plan would have been a total success. And if he was okay, if their deal was good, director, Oliver, or rather they shouldn't call him that. They should call him the Lord of the Leo constellation in the Colosseum. John was pissed because no one was doing their job right, except Nona. Hazar can't wrap his head around how he can defeat another saint if he's just a spirit. Hugo believes he can't beat a saint without his power, since the powers of the saints could only be nullified by other saints' powers. John doesn't give a damn. He only knew that he had won the battle. But the other subordinates think the fight was rigged. They should throw it out. Their captain wasn't there, so they couldn't deliver the verdict, and the only person from Leo's divine seat who was left was Nona. She should give the verdict, and Nona's clear verdict is that John was the winner. Some are crying while others are stoked for betting on John. Hassan tells Hugo that it made no sense. It was weird he destroyed a spirit with his power. Maybe he was the Holy Spirit of the new constellation. Then, he starts taking over all the relics there and forcing the fighters to sign contracts to join his divine seat. Kevin thinks if he's the future saint of humanity, the future is looking pretty grim. Doesn't see it the same way, but kept saying that John was a god. Did he have any proof, or was it just a rumor? He was just talking trash. John thinks that Libra knew they had stabbed him through the heart. She knew exactly where it had been. It was as if she had seen the scene. Libra must have seen what happened. He wonders if his saint could have intervened, and a mission arrives to baptize his disciple. He tells Hugo to pack his things. They're going to see his wife and son. From the Scorpio star cluster, Canada sees that Gian won. It was obvious. Scorpio St. Jamie, flirtatiously approaching the mirror, until someone interrupts him. There was a problem at the Scorpio hospital. Libra's children had arrived to attack the sleepers, but the sun of Sagittarius had stopped them, and as a result of the observations, 13th star cluster had appeared with Li Jian as its saint, and coincidentally Sun He was the first member of the group. Because of the arrival of a new constellation, it wouldn't be pleasant news. For other people, everyone would try to keep Jian's group under control, and at the hospital, there were a ton of people looking for the bounty for taking out the first saint. They will keep targeting Sun. Hey, they'll have to send in their forces. Scorpio Hospital, Korea. The three brothers were fighting others. Since they couldn't mess with their prey Sun He, remember that the other creatures didn't respect him. They couldn't be ruled by someone so weak. He had to get out of there, and this person asks if he was Sunjai. He thinks about running away, and his coin drops and his dad appears. Asks for Jian, but he had gone somewhere else. The person asks if Mr. Sagittarius was also present. Sunjay snitches on her to his father. She was a killer. Since he became a saint, everyone was hunting them down. She says she didn't do anything wrong, but she was lying. She was trying to backstab his son, and the god of Sagittarius appears to defend Sunjay, but she pulls out a book and writes a phrase which kills the nightlight and makes the god vanish. He was Eugen Scorpio's secretary, and she uses a verse from her Bible to make Hugo kneel before her. Hugo remembers that phrase was one that his god Sagittarius would sometimes recite, but the Bible couldn't be recited unless you were a god. But wasn't it a bit different from the original text? It was like an edited Bible. We're told that the Bible was a record of the progress and achievements of each constellation, and the biblical record itself turns into legend and myth. Special beings can read and write those Bibles. That's why those beings no longer existed in the distant past. The holy spirits, along with the vassal gods, wiped out everyone who possessed scribe abilities. They couldn't turn a blind eye to a power on the level of the saints. That's why the Holy Spirit of Sagittarius wanted to meddle. The secretary laughs. Her expression had changed. Now she should clear out the pests at the hospital, and Jian drops in from the air, kicking her. He just went to check on the hospital. The people who woke up were already in a jam again. He tells Hugo he better hurry up. Someone was waiting for him. Meanwhile, in the scribe's dream, during the catastrophe of his town, he was hiding in the rubble, pleading to be saved. He wakes up in a bed. They had saved him. It was Haley again. In reality, she was waking up to the embrace of Hugo and his wife. Iwo finally come out to the light. Jian thinks he has a very cool ability. If he remembers correctly, he must be a scribe. He uses his shadow ability to pull himself away. She'll snatch the wife to use her as a hostage, but Gian manages to save her. She was stoked, because she was also a Jian fan. Hugo asks the Scorpio disciple to let her go. He was supposed to catch her. He'll use his Bible skill, but there wasn't any page available to be used at that moment. By a new throne, and a giant hand captures him. Jian realizes that he had tried to open his Bible, and it's Franco. He will be his scribe in his sanctuary. He tells him to get lost, and Jian accepts. There was nothing that he could actually do, so he's going to kill him. but a red spell stops it. It was the Scorpio venom gland. That meant the Scorpio Saint was present, Jamie. She scolds her disciple for being so reckless. She hadn't given those orders to him. Jun right behind her says it's been a long time. She didn't want to scream. She just had to answer his questions. And the Saint has a total panic attack. They ask her if she was all right. She claims she just wanted to walk upside down. At that moment, she curses. It was impossible for Jian to be there. He should be in the Leo Sanctuary. She needed to get a grip. She looks at him and sees him in a magnificent way. Jian grabs her. She had to explain everything. She falls into a state of stupid infatuation. Oh, that word took me like 5 tries to record, man. Jian thinks he really hated her so much that he'd even get sick just talking to her, seeing as there was no other choice. He tells Yunjai he's going to be baptized, and he enters a universe completely different. He sees Jian and a snake, so incredibly magnificent that it pierces him with power, and he wakes up. He had been baptized successfully. With a unique ability, the Scorpio Saint asks if he was his first baptized. Now that he's done that, she could say he was a saint. She congratulates him. Seeing that he woke up, he attacks her with his subordinates, but she doesn't fight back, since she thought he wouldn't hurt her. But seriously, she had to explain why her power source belonged to the unknown civilization. She had fooled the whole world, but it was true. Her power was from the unknown civilization, but she still considers herself a person, and she was on his side. Jian asks her to prove it, and he'll give her a simple interrogation with 2 questions. What did she think of Li Jian, and what kind of relationship did she want to have in the future? She is surprised. Those questions weren't a big deal. The answers were colleague and strategic alliance. She doesn't understand why he made her write that, and Jian says he'll know the whole truth, thanks to his magic relics. If he had that, her true intentions would be revealed. And the revealed message said, I like him, he has charisma. That's why I'll betray the unknown civilization. Jian thinks that maybe the pen was broken. Sanjay hears this and runs off screaming that Nona should know Uncle Gion's chastity was in danger. He says he understood that his saint had turned her back on her roots and had chosen the human side. It was all for him because she wanted to, and the saint interrupts him, asking him to stop. Jian asks her about the civilization's weapons and the dagger that stabbed him. She explains that the weapon had the power of a monarch. Monarch means the highest rank of a creature from the unknown civilization. Even he couldn't resist a weapon like that, and when she saw them, she sealed them immediately. The Cap asks, what do you mean a separate civilization? They had wiped out the Red Eye 20 years ago, but she says that unfortunately that Calamity wasn't the boss. There were at least 3 Red Eyes, and they were much stronger than the one they'd seen. And well, guys, with that the intrigue that more powerful creatures exist, that they must face off against Hugo Lee. Now that he remembered it, the administrator of the Devil's Tower had said something similar. Hugo couldn't believe it. Had he heard that right? There were 3 more of those big-eyed freaks. The MC didn't give a damn, because the handsome guy shouldn't be afraid anyway. Nobody could block his path. Of course, it wouldn't be easy because they had to get stronger. That's why they needed that thing. He was getting pissed off. What was he saying? He was an idiot, since there was no way his master would ever hesitate asking if he needed anything else. And just like that, he fell into the abyss of betrayal. Then the next day, Li Jian could finally have a morning coffee, after a very long time, believing that no matter how busy he was, he should always make some time for himself. Meanwhile, behind his back, they were cursing him over and over. Did he have no feelings at all? Screaming at him about why the MC had to suffer like this. He just laughed. His master had sold him out for nothing. Now he had to work hard to look good for his boss. Crying, he felt like he would make them pay, since he'd regret ever trusting him with the Ophiuchus Bible, performing a complete synchronization, relying on page 5, effecting as a servant of Ophiuchus, changing history to subdue that man. Laughing at his achievement, he yelled at him to get on his knees right now, but they punched him. What the hell was he doing? Was he crazy or something? Claiming that clearly his plans had failed. He should take a good look at that Bible. He didn't understand it. She had changed that verse because it looked weird, writing that he would continue to be his servant for as long as his master wanted, asking if he had done something wrong. Then we're told that the Libra constellation is number 1, more than 2 million members, believing that the current Libra won't be an easy opponent for him. Plus Giselle, the star mistress of Libra, isn't just a substitute for the Holy Spirit. She's so close to the Spirit that she's considered an alter ego of the Holy Spirit. Dealing with Giselle is practically the same as dealing with the spirit of Libra, and so he can take care of the Holy Spirits and the monarchs of the unknown civilizations. He desperately needs a scribe to enhance his achievements, authority, and even power, telling the kid that she also had that ability and had hired him to have 2 scribes on his side by passing the trials. All his restrictions had been unlocked. Later at the Libra constellation headquarters in the Chongpyong Palace, they told her Scorpio had met with Lee Jian. She already knew, since that woman always had feelings for that man, but she was surprised it lasted more than 20 years. It was a very pure love. That's why she didn't care if more joined him. They were all idiots, since they were simply on another level. They would destroy him soon, and for now they had to set things in their favor. They had to take away his scribe no matter what. While they were at a nearby Scorpio building, Hugo asked if it was true that his wife would join his squad, asking him how he could do that. Saints always went after scribes. Besides, why did they have to be from his constellation? The MC told him that none of the 12 constellations gave him energy, so he only had his own constellation left. Hugo complained. Junji, for his part, also agreed. And just like that, the MC showed up with his super contract, super enhanced for his super wife. Hugo had no choice but to accept. She also told him about her daughter and the condition of her arm. The curse had been planted. She had suppressed it as much as she could, but there was a limit. It might be hard to hold it back any longer. The MC didn't know about this, asking them to tell him more about it. Then she said she had resolved everything, asking if she could organize the next section. Yujin told her to do whatever she wanted, remembering that the MC hit him with that mandatory pen, which doesn't let him act against him, cursing him and throwing Jion's pen, but it bounced back and hit him several times for abandoning her. Just then someone was watching them, cursing because his mother ordered him to come. But why was she asking him to do something like this? Nonetheless, he wanted to think of something positive. If he failed, they wouldn't give him the blood mist. He had to regain his mother's trust. The target was, the scribe was definitely that guy. But it seemed like the woman was one too. She looked much weaker, so he would go after her. While someone was approaching, he thought he would end this once and for all. And just like that, the door was kicked down. Kevin arrived, shouting about how he dared leave him at the Leo sanctuary. He would never forgive him. They were shocked, asking why the Saint of Virgo was there. The MC asked him why he made such a scene. Every time he showed up, he complained, but then noticed Scorpio. After arguing, they noticed the blonde guy. Coming to the conclusion that nobody invited him, Hugo got angry. What was that bastard doing there? It was Libra's son. He wondered what had just happened, and he got hit. Thinking a long time had passed, it seemed like he was the one who had caused his friends to cry, and his nephews. He was completely done for. Hugo shouted at him, asking if he wanted to mess with his family again. Haley thought it was obvious. He was there after finding out about the existence of his scribe. That's what his mother said, right? Kevin was just as furious. Was that Libra's son, the same one who called the toads to trash his sanctuary? The MC liked those thoughts, asking if he should blow his head off. He knew that if this kept up, he would die. So he yelled the word constellation. He had to move him to the hideout. Seeing that Lee Jian backed off a bit, it lit up. It had worked. Now he could hear, but he didn't get why that guy was laughing. Seeing their complaints about him leaving, the MC calmed them down. He had let him go on purpose. It was a shame to finish him off too fast. Later in Honolulu, Hawaii, at the luxury resort owned by Libra, the older brother, cursed. It was embarrassing that he recovered that way, but they'd see. He'd rip their limbs off and make them crawl. At that very moment, his brother yelled at him to move aside, crashing into him. Then they yelled at him, asking if he'd been captured, trying to get rid of the scribe. He was an idiot. He couldn't do anything right. Asking what they'd tell their mother now, he always had to clean up the messes he made. For now he had to follow him, leading him to a closet full of rocks. He explained he would use something equivalent to that. Each of those jewels was a core that couldn't be captured, something made to grind the ashes from the Devil's Tower attack. They were going to use them to trigger catastrophic calamities. He had to keep it together. Everything would be fine, since they had the Libra Rosary. They just had to hold it and see for themselves. Alert. Libra had used the equivalent exchange. They must have offered a core as tribute. Upon trading it, they would get a catastrophe that nobody could handle, emanating a massive yellow energy. But an error occurred. The energy was now turning light blue. They had no idea who the hell they had summoned. The Rosary couldn't control it. The blonde guy seemed to remember something like this before ducking down, and his brother got hit in the head. He laughed. He wouldn't do it again. The MC then guessed they were hiding there, and by the way, he had captured their escape vessel. The bird screamed that the catastrophic existence had appeared. They had succeeded and everyone was going to die, and since he was already there, he asked him what he wanted to talk about. He asked him to wait a bit. He admitted it. He was wrong. He would confess what he had done, and would go to the holy sanctuary and apologize. Jian laughed. He still didn't know what the real problem was. At that moment his sword fell, explaining that they were forgetting one of the most important things. He had to pay for everything he had done. The boy was struck with fear, believing he was really going to die. What should he do? He had to do something. Stumbling upon his brother's balanced rosary, he woke up asking about the object. Chengo took it, asking for forgiveness. But now that he thought about it, he was right. He was good for nothing, activating the equivalent exchange. But the change wouldn't be very useful to him. That's why they would take his brother's body, obtaining the reward for his title, transforming him into a catastrophe. And just like that, his brother began to transform bit by bit because of the object. The MC laughed. It was quite a show. The younger brother was sacrificing his own brother. Older one and a Holy Spirit takes it as an attribute. I didn't know they were like that. They were a family, completely different from the one I knew. Stepping up hard, deploying his sanctuary, the kid couldn't believe his eyes. Besides, his connection with Libra had been lost. They were in the palace of the Ophiuchus sanctuary, mentioning that his sanctuary grew as a reward for passing the trials. Libra's power could no longer be used there. Now his brother would turn to ash due to the lack of connection. It seemed his brother was right. He was completely useless as a saint. Jian could activate Sagittarius's piercing eye, asking if he had any last words. For example, something. Before dying, some little confession. He could even write his will. The kid just kept cursing over and over. What the hell was he doing? How could he torture him so relentlessly? It was because of that damn blood mist. He was young. Everyone makes mistakes. Often when they're young. The mist in Europe, the hospital attack, all of that were orders from above. Besides, he stopped the mist anyway. Everyone who died had come back to life. What was the big deal? Everything was resolved. It was all over now. He should just leave him alone. Besides, he didn't know who he was. He's the son of Giselle Lawrence, the saint of Libra. Did he really think his mother would just sit back if he touched him? As he looked at him, he cursed him. Had he fallen asleep, the MC thought. It was hard to keep his eyes open with such a boring speech. Didn't he have anyone to talk to? But at least the others had listened very carefully, since he wasn't the only one present for that boring conversation. Jian, hearing his doubts, explained to him literally what he had just said. It had been broadcast to the whole world. He had been preparing so that in any part of the world, they would hear him more or less. 8 billion people. Considering Sagittarius's ability, Piercer Eye was a type of clairvoyant skill capable of transmitting messages. At the Libra Sanctuary, they asked to intercept the message and find Jian's location, but this was impossible. No one could do anything. Meanwhile, in the city, everyone was shouting Libra's name. She had to explain herself. Had she gone crazy? She was a real piece of work. If it wasn't for Jian, Miles would have died, shouting for revenge against Libra. In the distance, someone felt the situation was messed up, wondering if there wasn't some hole to crawl out of, asking his brother for forgiveness. While he listened to the others' screams of hate, Jian congratulated him, asking him how it felt to be a world-class killer. He had given him the chance to apologize, but he had only complained. He had lost his last shot at being forgiven by this world. The boy just wept. Was he really going to die like this? They had to help him. At the sanctuary, they were reporting about the loss of reputation for Libra and the rise of Fuco citizens. They were informing their lady about it. They had to deploy their elite squads. She stayed silent and activated her eye. Jian told him to grit his teeth tight. However, someone stopped him. It was enough. He couldn't just sit there and do nothing. Jian felt like he had finally made it there. Was the traffic that bad to show up so late? She thought he won this round. She never thought he'd do something so insane. No one denied it. Not as insane as destroying an entire city. Hearing that she should give back her son, he denied it. He'd be merciful, but she had to pick an option or reveal every atrocity she'd committed and pay for it or fight him. Plus, she had to tell him who stabbed him. In that damn tower? She felt it was absurd. Why should she follow such a stupid suggestion? Jian imagined that response, cutting off her son's head. She demanded to know what he was doing. Jian remained calm, believing that wasn't all. She didn't understand it. Had he resurrected him? He wondered what was happening, and now they were cutting off his arm, then slicing him up multiple times and ripping his head off again. Hearing her protests, he calmed her down. Didn't she see it? It used to be too boring. It wasn't fair for his victims to die so quickly. That's why now he'd make them suffer as many times as the deaths that day, cutting him over and over again. That was the salvation he needed. He was his savior. With every death, he just begged for mercy. This was happening while everyone watched through the portals. Those in his temple couldn't stand watching what was happening. It was constant suffering for one of their brothers, and hours went by like that. Libra screamed at him, asking how much longer he'd test her patience. At that very moment, of pure rage, a portal opened above her. A massive beast appeared right in front of her. Looking closely at it, blood dripped from her lips out of fury. Jian laughed. It seemed like she was pissed off. But why was she just standing there doing nothing? Her eldest son had returned. She should give him a hug and say, "I love you." She cursed him. He would definitely pay the price for provoking her. Jian tightened his grip. That wasn't a provocation. That was just a response to the actions she had taken until now. Anything that got in his way was going to end up like this, whether they were beings chosen by the constellations or unknown civilizations, even if it was a Holy Spirit knocking, softly promising to see each other very soon. Until then, he should wash his neck for his arrival, shouting her name. Those present were asking her if she was okay, but she was radiating a monstrous power that echoed everywhere, shouting Lijin's name, saying she'd kill him and all his friends for messing with her territory, resonating throughout the whole city. They asked the boy if he had finally woken up. For a second, he felt sorry for him, but now he was going to die. Nonetheless, he asked him how many times he had cut him. It seemed like he had lost count. If so, they'd repeat everything all over again. Before 2,000 people had died in the hospital, then in the other place, 3,000 had died, and they told him to shut up. How could he calculate if he kept crying? But he gave up. He'd kill him 10,000 more times. Later at the Leo Stadium, they proclaimed the champion, Tian Yoha, as the brand new winner. She had knocked out her opponents in an instant once again. These three felt something was off. Originally, she was indifferent to victory in the arena, but now she was very interested in winning. She'd been acting like this since John declared war on Libra. They also felt it was the first time they had seen someone tortured so cruelly, but it had been awesome. While on stage, they showered her with questions and praises, asking her to say something. She had made up her mind. She decided to leave the Leo constellation. She also wanted to join the group of John. She couldn't take it anymore. At the hospital, they were trying to change the channel, but their leader had already fainted, screaming for him to wake up. Amidst their complaints, the news also reported on the lies and catastrophes Libra had caused. They asked for calm. Nothing had been confirmed. Libra's stance had not been expressed yet. Furthermore, she could be a strategy by the constellations to steal her prestige. This guy got mad, saying what was she talking about? If she weren't guilty, she shouldn't stay silent after such a huge incident. Most likely she was looking for some excuse to cover up the situation. Haley felt that the media always blew things out of proportion. He felt it. If they pulled their strings, it would be a piece of cake. To flex their influence, starting to discuss the pros and cons of the media situation, Hugo only asked for them to trust Gyeon. Kevin asked about him and why he hadn't shown up. Hugo figured he must be busy somewhere. Meanwhile, in Hawaii, at Libra's old hideout, a machine was tearing down the buildings. Gyeon felt they were doing a good job. The demolition was almost finished. He could already see his next construction. The revenue was already looking good because he had taken all the stones, and his new build would be for his sweet home. It was his reward for everything he had done, and he wondered if his own gift had reached its destination. Libra, for her part, was absolutely livid. How dare he send her something like that? He had been disrespectful to the very end. Why was he so obsessed with revenge? Asking if they had convinced Virgo, but they denied it. That guy was now on Gyeon's side. She didn't understand it. That's why they had to gather all the forces under her command. She couldn't just sit still. Now that all this was going down, this was total war. They had to contact all the branches, allied constellations, from all over the world. They had to take out John at all costs. They obeyed. They had to run. They had to spread the word that the war had begun. And when she was left alone, she called for her battle general to come out, reporting that he had gathered the troops from the unknown civilization, were all ready for her command. She understood, thanking him for his work. Gripping a sword, and in front of her was a world with yellow threads, which was turning into a dusty red color. With her right hand, she pulled that red into the world, while in the Pacific Ocean lightning bolts were appearing. It was the territory of the unknown civilization. From this black zone, a dragon appeared, and behind it, thousands upon thousands of beasts, monsters, skeletons, and demon armies appeared, who watched as a massive holy hand emerged and reached deep into the ocean. Libra unleashed her evil power. She had summoned them. They had to wipe out and slaughter Lijin and all his damn allies. It was an order screaming to the MC that she would make him feel overwhelming despair. As a countdown appeared 65 hours before the invasion, then on Hawaii at Libra's old palace, the new Ophiuchus Palace and workshop appeared. Jessley, Kevin, and his family. Kevin demanded to know what they were doing there, and as they looked up, they were stunned, wondering how he had done all that so fast. She welcomed them in. It was Asu, former Aquarius, former Libra, now called Disinfectant. She had been kidnapped by Libra, and now Gyeon took her as a prisoner. In her arms, she held the egg that Gyeon entrusted to her since she specializes in health and recovery. Kevin assumes he sets up his home there. Jessley got alarmed she couldn't let herself be outdone, ordering her vassal to bring all her forces to that place. They had to make their presence known. Now she asked them to go through that door. Inside, a type of serpent was spewing magma. Hugo asked what that was, realizing it was a steel factory, amazed by the madness. Also, it was very hot in there. They recognized Sagittarius, the slave of his master. Their god was waiting for them, showing us that they loved their work as blacksmiths like that. Entering another room, the sound of hammering could be heard inside. Introducing himself, while Hesley stood in the distance totally head over heels, Jian made a sexy entrance, making the women there blush. After that commotion, Kevin stepped out because it was too hot. They were trying to revive Scorpion, and he explained that he had built all of this using his new skill, the workshop creation skill. He was completely fired up, saying that he was going to stay there, since he would create in that workshop countless holy relics. As motivated as he was, he still had a lot of things to do, and everything he created was to get an upper hand in the war. At that moment, he was making a weapon for Yoha, then for Sunjay and another for Higuo. They were getting excited except Hugo because he wasn't mentioned. John asked for it back after hearing his doubts. He asked for his sanctuary since it was already trashed. Thundering blows echoed through the place. Iguan shouted that Heesel had disappeared. Was their base being attacked? As they went outside, massive boxes had arrived. Trembling, she said that her sanctuary was like her home, so it had to have a grand opening. He should see this as a gift. Feeling proud because it felt totally natural, saying there was food here, money over there, sacred objects in the other one, materials and so much more. Hugo felt she was trying way too hard, wishing him luck with her, and he was shocked she hadn't ordered that. Handing letters to Gion. Hugo assumes it was a fan letter. The outside said, resumes. The redhead explained what Nona had done yesterday and all the buzz she caused, guessing it was because of that. Meanwhile, in the U.S. at Leo headquarters, he was absolutely furious. Why had she said that? It was enough for her just to leave, but now, many people because of her were walking away from her side. But he realized that she knew it, asking if she could leave. He asked her if she was sure about leaving that place because of her arm. She remembered Fatal Day 10 years ago. She was at the Scorpion Hospital with her brother. At one point, she heard a noise, asking if it was her father, moving forward to look for him. As she did, she saw a door approaching and someone greeted her. She must be Nona. Nona recognized that woman as the saint of Libra. She wanted to talk a bit somewhere else. Then she said she was really sorry about her mother. Seeing that smile, she thanked her. Now she understood why. Hugo always bragged about his kids. Even though she had been through a lot, she was still very mature. She was always worried about her children, wanting them to behave just like her. Even now they had gotten into trouble. That's why they were locked in their rooms, mentioning that raising kids was very hard. She should listen closely. She liked kids like her, wondering how great it would be if she were her daughter. Nona didn't understand her, and after a silence, she just smiled. It was just a joke. She shouldn't be scared asking for forgiveness for being rude. Summoning some reddish earrings, she told her to take them. They were a gift to commemorate their meeting. Hearing her hesitation, she urged her to take them. They were especially for her, insisting over and over again. Hugo was walking nearby, recognizing Libra's voice. Seeing that it was his daughter receiving those earrings, he freaked out. Nona looked at them happily as they fell into her hands, which unleashed a red fury. Hugo screamed for her not to do it, and a thunderous sound echoed through the area. An explosion could be seen in the distance. Among the crowd there was someone. Hugo screamed for his daughter, who was only crying out in pain. It was unbearable. He set himself ablaze to try and help his daughter. But Libra just laughed, and like that, Hugo was repelled and slammed into the wall, realizing instantly that his current strength wasn't enough. Libra laughed, wondering if he still thought he was a saint. Listening to his complaints, she told him to calm down. He had already failed as a husband. Now he would fail as a father. Hearing her shouts, he felt those words were very different from what she had said before. Even though his daughter was incredible, he never thought she would hold out this long. The evil god's energy, she was still resisting, even despite the pain, but it was clear she wouldn't last long. It seemed there was no other way to save his daughter, unless she became her property, and she told him to shut up. This was a hospital, demanding he come under her command. He had to let go of his attachment to the deceased. Lygian knew his worth. If he followed her, she would reward him and restore his rank. It was a tempting offer, wasn't it? Now he had to choose either abandon his daughter or go with her. At that moment, Nona grabbed her foot, screaming for her not to mess with her father. She laughed sarcastically. She was a cutie. She couldn't believe she was still conscious, but she'd said it before. She liked obedient children. So now she had to follow her order summoning, her Libra sacrifice. Hugo lunged at her, begging her to stop. However, both felt a presence. A thunderous crash filled the place. The Leo skill, victorious battlefield, had appeared, thinking that he had scouted that girl long ago to be his disciple. Stephen Marker had appeared, who thought she did something horrible to her, to a little girl. But she had held her own, believing she could be someone at the highest level, if she's in his constellation. Someone comparable to a Holy Spirit, believing she would fit right in his constellation of beasts. Libra yelled at him to stay out of it, but he shut her up. She had said she would do whatever it took to increase her power. She had created her own evil spirit. He knew exactly why. He was trying to stop her, but if she was so determined, she should use that evil ability to see if she could take down Nona. Libra accepted the challenge. Outside ambulances were appearing. Shouts of people looking for Mr. Steven could be heard. He thought there was a huge crowd. He was a fighter. He loved an audience, but she would keep going if they saw her. She stopped, blasting the power she held in her hand, smashing part of the building, thinking that for now he wouldn't escalate the situation further, but one of these days she'd pay for it. Laughed while threatening her, telling her to come whenever she wanted, since soon he would surpass even Jian. She cursed, calling him just a stupid animal, vanishing from the scene. Steven felt it had been refreshing. He didn't need to thank him. When asked what brought him there, he said he just came to see their faces before leaving the country, while also calling him out for holding hearings, public apologies and all that stuff. He should go with him so they wouldn't suffer anymore for now. He knew Gaon and could help surpass him. Hugo thanked him but declined. For now he had to free his daughter, but he couldn't. If he freed her from the evil spirit, it would break loose. His daughter would once again become the target of Libra, to put it bluntly. He asked if he could even protect his own daughter in that state. The reality is that in that state he couldn't even be called Sagittarius. The spirit that attacked his daughter had animal-like traits. His group was expert in that, so it might not be possible to eliminate it, but he could suppress it so it wouldn't go wild. Therefore, he would take her with him, breaking the barrier. And indeed, the evil spirit was suppressed by the power of Leo, failing to recruit him, but he would take his child who had great potential. Hearing why he saved him, he remembered the past and why he couldn't protect John. Feeling his conscience heavy that moment, just came back to his mind. When he defended him, returning to the present, Nona was always going to be grateful for what he had done in her past, but her growth had stopped. If she wanted to help her uncle, she had to become stronger. Steven nodded. He had done his best for the last 10 years, starting to speak words of sadness, asking that even if she left, she should take care of herself. Nona didn't buy it. He was crying, and just as she was about to speak, they were interrupted, shouting at her to just leave already. He had heard everything and never took that group seriously. They had to get lost. Steven yelled at him, asking what he was doing. He was already convincing her to stay. Nona couldn't believe it. Had he really used fake tears? And so they began to fight over that girl, over and over again with Steven, demanding that everyone get out of his constellation. The bald guy got it. That was no longer an issue. Hearing him tell him to calm down, he refused. He was always ridiculously ignorant about the members of his group. How could he even call himself a person, releasing a massive amount of energy? Steven asked if that was really Libra's energy. What the hell had he done? He laughed. Now he finally felt good. He had become much stronger than before. With that power, he would fix the discipline of the constellations. Steven yelled at him to stop asking what he was doing. But in that split second, Leo's arm was sliced off. Steven cursed. His body had been shredded by a single strike, shouting about why he had betrayed him, but he denied it. That was no betrayal. If he had been a good administrator, he never would have done something like this. He was only trying to rebuild his constellation, saying that the logics of Leo's power was pure strength. But he had appointed Nona as Vice Lord, an S-rank person. Even though he was a double S-rank, he outclassed that girl in every way. Why the hell had he chosen her? A decision like that wasn't based on merit. But now it didn't matter. Li Zhong could easily take him down. He was so hyper-focused on that prick that he neglected his own constellation. He even had to take out the previous Celestial Lord just to become the Celestial Lord himself. Leo couldn't wrap his head around it. He couldn't believe the master had died while the other just laughed. It was like that. Or why did he think his predecessor died alone? Without getting any backup, it was him who was commanding and directing the troops back then. At that very moment, Nona lunged forward, grabbing his head, slamming him into the wall. He thought it was thrilling. That was the skill that Steven Marquez had created alongside Li Jian. It seemed like Steven had passed that skill down to her. But that skill was way too weak to avenge her master, to properly crush her opponent. She had to do something like this. All 4 floors of the building had been pierced through. Those present recognized her as their vice lord, asking if she was all right. And bursts of laughter were heard from above, demanding she get up fast and counterattack, shouting that she was no match for him anymore. If she didn't want to die, she had to unleash the beast in her arm and fight him. If she didn't, he would completely crush her. Meanwhile, in the creation workshop, Jian felt like he was ready. It was pretty noisy, but it was almost time to head out. From now on, he'd give her a task to complete as a secretary, since it looked like his daughter needed some help. With that, he thought this place was as good a spot as any to die. Nona asked him if he had done all that just to get the position of Celestial Lord. She guessed he must be hyped because he got a little stronger. He didn't quite get it. Didn't she see him rip Steven's arm off? With one hit, his power was that of a saint. He'd be the strongest man alive. Nona questioned. The strongest? What had he achieved besides trapping the master and cutting Steven's arm off with a cheap shot? He hadn't even finished her off, and she was only an S rank. He wasn't the strongest, not by a long shot. He was just Leo's sub-captain, who didn't even know his place. That's why he'd be punished right here and now. He got pissed off, activating the Golden Beast skill and transforming into a panther. Nona, at an impressive speed, managed to land a kick on him, sending him flying. But before he hit the ground, she sped up even more with her fists, destroying everything. But on the final attack, she was caught and slammed into the ground. It didn't matter how hard she fought. She was useless. This was her end. His mistress told him to try and capture her, but he didn't want to do that anymore, since she couldn't even use her right arm. Nona was angry at herself, because she couldn't defeat someone like Oliver, plus she couldn't get a hold of her uncle, or even that person. He didn't understand what she was babbling about. She had to face her destiny. As he hurled an entire train at her, she fired up once again, thinking that she never wanted to be helpless ever again. She didn't want to lose like she did back then. This time she would definitely win. She would stand on equal footing with her Uncle Gion. She'd give everything to make it happen. And then she heard a voice she really liked. That personality. Recognizing her uncle's voice, but the train was already way too close. However, something was happening. And looking straight ahead, she wondered if that was a spear. They used to say that the serpent's weaponry must choose its master and follow them no matter what. This should last until the very end of the master's life. And since it was finally finished, he asked what to do now. Gion told her to throw it as high as possible. She understood. The guy couldn't believe that throwing style, and the spear exploded with speed, darting from one side to the other. Gion felt like it had worked out well. Now the spear had found its own path. Up above, Steven cursed for being humiliated like that, and an attack appeared right beside them. This attack managed to stop the collision between Nona and the train. She was amazed by that weapon. It was an Ophiuchus spear, welcoming her indomitable fighting spirit. Now she needed to prove her worth to join Ophiuchus. She accepted the mission. With a smile, and an immense power appeared. He felt that a weapon didn't change anything in this fight. He was going to finish her off right now, lunging at her. Nona used the Flaming Lotus skill. He yelled at her that he'd already told her her power was useless against him. But the bolt was amplified by Ophiuchus, shouting that now it was her turn to attack. Lotus disaster. Steven asked what was going on down there. At that moment, Nona's power shattered the entire pavement. It was an enormous power. Half the underground city had been destroyed. He should see for himself what had happened. But when he reached the bottom, the first thing he saw was Oliver. He was certain he would win, but he got taken down by a mere S-Class. Steven told him to realize he shouldn't underestimate that girl. To her, being the strongest wasn't just a label, but a purpose. It wasn't talent or luck, it was pure sacrifice. But looking down, he didn't know she had so much power, and Nona arrived at his side. Oliver felt he was lucky. Both were now present, but Steven just kept yelling about what was happening, constantly interrupting Oliver because he could sense Gion's energy. They started arguing about how he'd already changed before speaking, focusing only on each other. Oliver screamed at them that they were bastards. They better listen up. Mocking them, he felt this wasn't his end. It was only the beginning. They had no idea what Libra truly was. Besides, their headquarters had been destroyed. They understood what that meant. The barrier protecting Leo had been disabled. Destruction would soon reach Steven there. Seeing that energy, he wondered if he was planning to do something more. Was he summoning a disaster? And in that instant, the world froze. A calamity had appeared. It had crimson red eyes. Steven didn't understand. That damn thing should have died in the demon tower. They had to run. It was a calamity. It inhaled deeply and unleashed its power. People ran in desperation. But Steven didn't, leaving even Nona stunned. Meanwhile, at Ophiuchus' sanctuary, Gion felt something in the distance, having a bad feeling. Alerts began appearing on the news. Calamities had appeared across the globe. The confirmed regions were the United States, the European Union, and Korea. They were on red alert. The appearance of one of them was very similar to that of the Crimson Eye that caused the massive commotion last time. In it, the constellations had spoken the calamities would be stopped and everything would be liberated by Libra. They understood it. It seemed like they wanted to clear their name, but they never thought it would be with the Crimson Eye. Hugo didn't understand how that had happened, asking himself if maybe he hadn't actually defeated it. Even the other saints had ended up with those eyes. She mentioned that there was a dispute afterward over the ownership of the body. After some arguing, it was decided that the head should be sealed away in the sea. At Libra's suggestion, John got it. It was that damn woman. He had to go kill the Crimson Eyes. He also wanted to check if it was the one he hunted before, or another one. Calling Scorpion, requesting that she please set up security at his sanctuary in case of enemies. Barriers, formations, and traps, those were her specialties. She was the only one he could trust with that. She could only think about how close he was. Seeing that smile, she grinned like she was in love. He should leave it to her. She'd do it for him, even if it meant pulling the pillars from her own sanctuary. Her general begged her to calm down, but she didn't pay him the slightest bit of attention, since Gion told her she was the only one on his mind. Gion practically asked her to live together. Our protagonist told Hugo to go to Korea immediately. He reassured him about Nona. She still had energy left. He'd take good care of her, so there was no need to worry. He had to get to Korea because if Libra did something to Korea, the situation would be hard to handle, with just a group of kids. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Korea, monsters were being attacked. But the archers were cursing there were too many. How did they break through the lines so easily? And they shouted that even more had appeared. The monsters were tearing everything apart. They were almost infinite. However, an explosion appeared in the distance. The beasts realized it and were sent flying. Someone couldn't believe they were having trouble with such pathetic guys. It was obvious they belonged to the Archers constellation. He was the saint of Taurus, Ivan Kruger, and he asked where that idiot Hugo had gone. He thanked him for his help. If he had anything to say to his lord, he would deliver the message. The man denied it, saying he'd wait patiently, but they needed to know something. He really hated being blocked. Slamming one of them into the wall, he explained that he would be fine. There was no need to worry. He was still angry anyway. He knew he must have shown up there for a reason, since his relationship with Sagittarius was anything but good. Seeing that aura, he realized he was strong, suggesting he should join him instead. Hearing his refusal, he didn't know how that bastard Hugo could control his forces so well, but it didn't matter because Libra had told him he could destroy everything, so he'd have a little fun at Ophiuchus. Hugo asked to be contacted if anything happened, but she was calm since she'd be with Gion. Hugo said goodbye. The protagonist would join him soon, after defeating Crimson Eye. Besides, his weapon was almost finished, and as he left, he believed they couldn't leave just yet. First, they had to catch the rats approaching the sanctuary. Seeing that the Red Servant had left, they had to move forward. That was the signal. Everyone had to target that man named Gion. They had to prepare for battle. They were Phantom Knights from the unknown civilization, Black Level. In that moment, Scorpion had finished. She had even brought her relic. Now they'd see if those fools could make it through. The boy didn't understand how he'd filled that place with so many totems. Believing that his constellation was about to crumble, the general told her to follow in silence. The princess had already made up her mind. The boy understood, then heard a crack. The main Scorpion totem was screaming, and then it shattered. And this was happening to many of them. Scorpion explained that there were enemies very close by, ones that were powerful enough to break the statues. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the entire place, mocking them for being so careless, demanding the name of the master of this place. Seeing that they'd cut off his sentence, they blew him up with an attack. The general asked if they were okay, warning them to watch out for those guys. Scorpion knew they were strong. Could they be the army of the unknown civilization? They believed that if that man didn't show up, they should just kill everyone present. Lunging toward them, the general's stinger attacked, but it was sliced completely by the skeleton. He couldn't believe how he'd destroyed a domestic god with just a single blow. The only thing Scorpion could do was put her hand out in front of her, but it felt like such a simple attack. Spinning around, using her momentum, she struck him with her Scorpion Whip, demanding how he dared to step on this land. With his filthy feet, Jian cheered that that's the way to do it, and thousands of attacks appeared behind her. This hail of arrows pierced through the skeletons except for the strongest ones. Jian had heard the sound of rats, but he never imagined the rats would be this big, demanding to know what they were doing there. The captain recognized him as the target they were looking for. Although he was too young to be called a saint, it was a bit disappointing. Jian cursed. What the hell was he saying? Since when did he have to live up to that guy's expectations? They just needed to answer one question. Who were they? The soldier told him to shut up. How dare he talk to his captain like that? He tried to shut him down with an attack, but Gion struck him back. Jian was furious. How dare he interrupt him? The captain, seeing that, assumed he was strong, which is why Libra had summoned them, asking him what his name was. Upon hearing his name, he recognized him as the Master of the Serpent. He apologized for underestimating him. They were the vanguard knights of the army of the unknown civilization. They were there to annihilate the human race that followed the traitors to the gods. Damn if he interfered with them. They would destroy him, shouting at his soldiers to attack at once. They had to advance for the monarch. Jian still felt like he was being looked down upon. Annihilate, destroy, was he kidding? It seemed he needed to teach them a lesson. Summoning his celestial sword, it appeared with great speed, tearing through a significant number of beasts. The captain attacked Gion, but he was shocked because Gion caught his weapon, thinking it would be way too weak, slamming him against the ground. The others went into revenge mode, but Gion dodged with impressive speed. They were way too slow for him, and all their weapons were halted. in the same spot. Now, they couldn't get free. Our protagonist then pulled out his mallet and started swinging it everywhere, as it increased in size, yelling that they were useless. They were no match for him. The vice general cursed. His troops had been slaughtered in an instant, and if he didn't trigger an explosion, would you like me to translate the remaining part of this scene or refine any specific dialogue? She screamed at Gian that she had set all of his allies free just like he said. They were absolutely livid. How dared they enter their lord's sanctuary? They were going to wipe them all out. He still believed he had arrived just in time. Now he could personally handle the captain. The captain got pissed, shouting that he'd slice him with his spear, unleashing a massive power. He lunged at Gian but was cut in half. However, another attack came from above, surprising the skeleton by blocking it. Gian yelled at him to use a little more muscle, while he kicked the horse and then attacked it again, causing the captain to leap off it, fueling his rage. Screaming to see if he could actually block that new attack, he would take him and his subordinates out in a heartbeat, charging up his strength and throwing his sword, making him lose his balance, changing the direction of his attack. His allies cursed. The captain was in deep trouble, but at least they hadn't hit him. But something caught him. It was those damn insects. They were pulling on his whip. He thought they were idiots. They had closed the distance between them. They were clearly looking to get killed, but a scorpion said it was his turn, and so Gian ran his sword through the army captain, thinking he was way too loud for someone about to be dead, slamming him into the ground, feeling like it was much better that way. The other soldiers had been subdued by his subordinates. The captain couldn't believe that. His knights had been defeated so easily. Leon just laughed. He had even helped them. He was one hell of a captain. In that moment of desperation, his eye lit up, explaining that if he died, he was at least taking him down with him. They were going to hell together, thinking that no matter how strong he'd never survive a fall from the stratosphere. Gian didn't know what he had planned, but he definitely didn't like this position. Switching places, setting himself up right on top of him, feeling like he always wanted to go surfing, at least once in his life, and he asked when they were going to hit the ground. Meanwhile, near the Leo headquarters in Washington, D.C., the Calamity had completely trashed the place. Nona thought she was a goner, and Steven, all beat up, was asking if everyone was okay. Slumping to the floor, he had managed to tank the attack, even though now he couldn't even eat chips with his own hands. Furthermore, he cursed as that thing started moving again. They had to stop it. The others from his cult were arriving, believing that after everything, the spirit of Leo was still burning, but they put their faith in Steven, feeling that if he had taken it down before, they could definitely do it now. Nona tried to calm them down, saying that wasn't possible. That thing was way stronger than before. Besides, they had to save the rest of the citizens, ordering them to get organized for the battle and the rescue mission. They understood. Steven thanked her, but she was only returning the favor from before. Plus, with her new mission now, she had to crush that thing, asking her if she was going to help out. He could show her the old skill that had defeated that monster. He denied it. She should have known by now. He didn't defeat that thing in the past. It was Gian, but he wasn't there at the moment, so he had no choice but to attack. It was his time to shine. He would use the descendant of his divine god. It didn't matter how risky it was, because if he didn't, the citizens would be in grave danger. His mind was made up. This was his chance to make up for his shameful behavior from 20 years ago, starting to radiate an extraordinary light, shouting that this time he wouldn't run away, like he did back then, telling Nona to cover him while his god descends. The Calamity realized the level of power, attacking with total fury. Meanwhile, the skull screamed, and Gian thought they had finally landed, kicking it to gain momentum and then sliding down the beast to soften the fall. Steven was yelling, wondering what the hell that was, and John was falling right on top of him, mentioning he had traveled a long way in that drop. Recognizing the voice, he asked him what he was doing there, and also what that guy was doing on the ground, claiming that the skull had brought him to Washington, D.C. while the skeleton laughed. It was all over. It made no sense to try to beat it. Not even he could handle the Crimson Monster. His death was already a done deal. Gian laughed, asking if he was the same as before, asking him if he remembered him. Then they mentioned that 20 years ago, the ruler of the Demon Tower suddenly appeared. The greatest disaster had emerged and was defeated by Gian. However, in the present, he felt this was something very different. Besides, his greeting was a bit rough. It had been a long time since they last saw each other, so he had to say hello properly. Starting to leap between buildings at top speed, the beast made a slash so massive it split the building in two, but the protagonist kept dodging, feeling that something was off. It was dumber than before. Using the eye of Defu, realizing the head was original, but its body was completely new. This body was covered in Libra's energy. While at the Libra sanctuary, she didn't care if Gian was fighting the Calamity. That was just a puppet, though. It still worried her, since that idiot was able to defeat the Mist not too long ago, even with borrowed power. Right then they had something to report to her. They had just confirmed that Hugo was in Korea and was currently with Ivan. They also told her about the army that had been wiped out. She asked about Callie, but they apologized, saying he hadn't picked up her call. She felt he still didn't want to hear from her, but they couldn't waste any more time. That's why she'd go to war to command the troops. The target was Korea and the Demon Tower. Meanwhile, in Korea, Seoul. Hugo arrived, and Ivan felt like he was finally showing up. Hugo demanded to know why he was there, and why he had laid a finger on his subordinates. He was there because of the Demon Tower. The Crimson Eye had appeared, and he was there to investigate it. Besides, he was just teaching a lesson to those subordinates because they lacked discipline. Hugo cursed him, calling him a total moron. Furthermore, if he was there to check out the tower, why hadn't he gone inside yet? Was he too chicken to go in? Just like 20 years ago, Ivan stood up, mocking him because he seemed overconfident now that he'd regained a bit of strength. But even then, even if he got all his strength back, he was still an idiot without a relic. Did he forget that he was the one who broke it? Guess this time it was his turn to get crushed. Snapping his cigarette, using the Taurus skill. His subjects screamed for him to dodge, but Ivan just scoffed. Was he just standing there frozen? Because he was scared to die. But Hugo clenched his fist, unleashing a punch fueled by pure rage, shocking everyone watching. Ivan demanded to know how he'd repelled that attack. Hugo shot him down. What do you mean I don't have my relic? Summoning his brand new and upgraded bow with the blessing of Pyuko, shouting, "What's wrong now?" Was he just standing there frozen because he was scared? At that moment, a ton of debris fell on him, wondering what the heck that was. But seeing his fear, he told him to chill. He was pissed because he messed with his men, but he wouldn't use his relic. Because to keep it fair, they should settle this with their bare fists. Ivan couldn't believe his ears. How dare he treat him like that? And Hugo was already closing in with a punch, feeling that since he always bragged about his strength, he'd better prove it now. Ivan was still looking down on him, but that guy's power was starting to surprise Hugo, guessing that an archer's strength should never be underestimated, but he slammed him with a headbutt, believing it had actually hurt him. Hitting him back, Ivan did the exact same thing. Hugo charged up his energy, smashing his face in, blowing up the place and then breaking his leg. Now it was time for payback. Hearing his complaints, he drove a knee into him. The subordinates didn't understand what was happening up there, while Ivan just took hit after hit, thinking that if this kept up, they'd kill him. Equipping his body with the Taurus armor, laughing, he felt like he had caught him off guard, but now round 2 was about to start. The second round, Hugo dodged, since he wanted to go all out. He should pull out his bow too. At that moment, Hugo hadn't realized how Jian had totally trashed his relic, and in that instant, the bow completely shattered. In a sort of sea, Stephen didn't understand why he couldn't move. He couldn't remember anything after using his god's ability, starting to snap out of it because of a sound, telling himself over and over that he couldn't give up. People were in danger. Then after a short lapse, he finally came to, and right in front of him, Jian was slicing off the Calamity's arm, demanding to know what that guy was doing there while the protagonist was just enjoying the fight. Believing he was an imposter, that damn administrator had brought him back, but he already knew how to beat him. He just had to pull off that damn attack. The beast tried to catch him, and seeing his speed, charged up its death blow. Jian understood. That was the opening he wanted, slamming his hammer into its jaw, so that its attack could no longer be fired, but couldn't disappear either. And just like that, Jian incinerated the Calamity. It was strong, he'd admit that, but its opponent was him. Everyone there. They saw how the head of the worst calamity of all had been cut off by a single man. Even Stephen admitted that guy was amazing. Then they gathered at his back. Jian knew he was there. It was another Crimson Eye, realizing that thing was just a vessel, since while he was trapped in the tower administrator kept reviving monsters, of course including the Crimson Eye and the Black Dragon. He fought for 20 years against monsters that resurrected over and over. But Libra didn't have that ability. She could have taken advantage of the dragon, but she hadn't been trapped for 20 years, telling the skull that it must be disappointing. It just wanted to be killed. But that wasn't an option. Nona asked what they would do now. At that moment, Gian received a notification that the Sagittarius relic had broken, but that seemed absurd until he remembered what he'd done earlier, assuming it was actually normal. But he was busy. He'd postpone that for now. Meanwhile, Hugo was just screaming for his life, begging Georges to answer him already, while the other guy just mocked him. Hugo was only making excuses. While dodging, he kept taunting him for being too slow. Obviously, it was an archer's agility, yet attacks were appearing on the ground. Jean had shown up. Louis Moran Torres thanked him for the opportunity. However, a sword was aiming for his face. Hugo didn't get what was happening, and Kevin appeared, seeing. From his words, he felt he was never treated right. That's why he was weak. Hugo yelled at him, asking what he was talking about. He was winning, but Kevin felt they should pay more attention. to the defense of their sanctuary since it was infested with flies. Gemini, Capricorn, and Aries, he'd handle them. He needed to check if his group was safe. But here it's revealed that Kevin wanted to go to the United States, but got the location wrong, and at that moment, Taurus was thawing out. Did they really think they could trap him with that attack? Starting to trade words, Louis calmed him down, dismissing them as the two weakest, but those words fired these two up, starting to argue all over again. However, a presence appeared. Libra thought it was good to see them all together. It had been a long time, since the last time. Then they complained because their home had been destroyed once again. Dolls were screaming for them to let go, starting to fight. But something in the sky caught their eye. It was a dragon, and that's how Libra showed up. They asked her why she was there. They hadn't failed yet, but she told them to shut it, opening a magic circle, filling the place with intense pressure. Even her own allies, believing they couldn't even manage to capture a saint like Sagittarius. They were weak bastards. Instead of asking questions, they should be thanking her for showing up before they died. Both of them were grounded. As for them, she'd play with their bodies a bit, feeling like she could just swap around their limbs. She had used Libra's ability, equivalent exchange. The allies recognized Libra and asked why they were there. At that instant, a black dragon appeared, and on top of it was the protagonist. He was heading at full speed through the city. Jian yelled at her that she was trash, jumping right at her. Those present wondered if Libra had been defeated in a single blow. No one there could believe it. Jian asked them why they were up there. They always got into trouble whenever he wasn't looking. Kevin was calling him out, but Hugo was calling him out, even harder for his weapon and for ignoring him. Jian would explain it to him later. These two stared at each other, shouting that this wasn't over yet. Taurus used his ultimate skill, but with a single blow, he was sent flying and went. He didn't get why it had turned to night, and next to him, a dragon had eaten. Lois and Jian gave the black dragon the order to also eat that trash. They thought that thing was amazing. Jian explained to them what had happened and how he brought it back to life with his domestic skills and lots of materials, although Hugo thought Gian was dangerous. He remained confident that nothing would happen to them. Kevin asked them why Libra's scales still hadn't disappeared. She answered her own question. It was simply because she was still alive. Jian assumed it wouldn't be easy, summoning his weapons while laughing, because now he'd really wrecked that ugly face of hers. She was ready to take a beating. She had expected it. The baby snake had tried to bite first, so it needed to be put on a leash. He yelled at the dragon to watch over the others. Libra opened a portal in the sky, triggering a massive explosion. The dragon managed to save them while Jian knew it, the trash in front of him. Libra wasn't human. She laughed, asking if he already knew, noting that she could use powers different from those of the saints. Even if her head was crushed, she could regenerate. Shouting that he recognized her, declaring the name of the divine god of Libra. Astria! She burst into laughter. He was very sharp. Now she had nothing to worry about. He still lunged. He didn't know how a god was on Earth, but it was going to be interesting for other divine gods to know about it. She smiled, charging up her power, managing to send the protagonist flying for the first time. Astria shook her hand. Those blows always hurt her fingers a little. They didn't understand why the hell the Taurus zodiac was on top of Giselle's head. She laughed, telling them not to be so shocked. She still had way more to show them, making 6 magic circles appear. She had Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Capricorn, Aquarius, and even Aries. Gian thought it was ridiculous. He figured that's why she didn't care if the other gods found out those bastards had a conspiracy going. She could feel it. The rage of the divine gods who lost their saints had exploded. They had chosen her as their representative, but she never understood why he hated them so much. But regardless, it didn't matter how strong he was. Humans have their limits. The protagonist said she talked too much. What was her point? She didn't like him, but she recognized his skills. If he were her subordinate, he'd be the king of that world. But if he refused, he simply wouldn't exist anymore. But Gian did refuse. She wasn't even worth listening to. He always made his own calls. He didn't care about following others. She figured he'd say something like that. He wasn't that smart after all. Now he was a problem. First, she was going to wipe out that damn city. Aries skill. Weapon of the divine god. Aquarius skill. Whirlpool, Cancer skill division. Thanking Gian because thanks to him, those disasters had appeared, creating a magic circle, trapping the protagonist, demanding he disappear for good. Libra laughed, seeing him held back. Since that skill was the power of the gods, it was going to be tough for him to break it, and she still had plenty left. More that truly made him suffer, stopping those swords. Libra told him not to give up. He still had a lot to say, starting a relentless attack with that power of the gods. The people there were just running and screaming for help. In the middle of the crowd, a reporter was reporting on the situation, but a sword was heading straight for them, and Kevin showed up trying to stop it. Though he couldn't quite do it, Hugo saved him while cursing, because the protagonist had broken one of those things, and they were having a hard time with just one. After telling them to get to safety, they assumed that's why Jian didn't want them nearby. They were weak compared to him. But at that moment, a massive shadow appeared. It was a tsunami. People began to panic. That wave was taller than the buildings. They were as good as dead. Kevin had an idea and asked something of his great lady. The protagonist was also in disbelief, not knowing what to do. That wave would kill everyone, but upon hearing a faint whisper, he smiled. He was one clever bastard. Libra asked if Gion was already dead, or where the hell he was. Using her constellation skill, she wondered how many would die. She was going to destroy them all. But at that moment, the giant wave was completely stopped. Libra yelled to her clones that Gaon was still alive. They had to go after him. As they drew closer, they wondered what that was, and the black dragon that had been dormant appeared. He told the dragon what to do. It should greet those witches with its breath. She cursed him while opening the Gemini portal, redirecting its attack, sending the attack back toward the people again. The dragon flew at full speed. Jian yelled at her to stop messing with the people. They had nothing to do with this as he managed to break the attack. Astria flew into a rage. It was that damn lunar bitch. Jian told her that it seemed she wasn't the only one with some backup. Now he would embody everyone's wrath. She didn't understand. Look, that was ridiculous. Did she really think there was anything greater and more terrifying than the wrath of the divine gods? Gion felt it. Did she think people didn't know about her atrocities? His friends, his family, innocent people, and her damn betrayal. That's why she would face their wraths, demanding to know if she was the one who stabbed him in this demon tower, or if it was one of the bastards behind her. She just laughed at how hard he fought to find out that truth. But questions can only be asked by those with power. So she asked what two divine gods could do against all of them, beginning to summon a nuclear-scale attack. Meteor of destruction, he shouted, asking if she was sure there were only two gods taking the hit. Sagittarius royal skill. Ring of the sun god. Jian increased his speed, slamming them to the ground. Astria recognized that damn Sagittarius power. Hugo and Kevin called out to everyone as celestial lords that they should pray to. Jian, the protagonist, shouted that he'd told her so. There were a lot of people who were pissed at her. It wasn't just the constellations asking the wrath of the seven divine gods, even if she had all of them. It wasn't enough to appease the anger of humanity, asking how many hits that ugly face could take. Astria screamed for him to get his hands off her, summoning her clones. Jian laughed. Another presence had appeared, and this one shouted at her not to dare touch Gion, and just like that, destructive attacks broke out at an impressive speed. She didn't understand what was happening then. A Scorpio chain appeared. Gion figured that to defeat the other zodiacs and get to her, he first had to deal with the crab. Astria demanded to know how he knew the Cancer Core was right there. Gion just laughed and told her to brace herself, starting to yank it, destroying the Cancer Core, stripping that power away from her. Cursing him, she would definitely kill him as spirits. Grabbed Gion's leg. They were kamikaze spirits. Astria didn't stop using a combo skill, Aries and Libra, shouting that someone like him can't defeat them. But he was surprised because that skill belonged to Virgo. Even her sword had been frozen, and he was still completely fired up, charging in to attack. Feeling that her greed had no end, he had to stomp her so hard to make her stop talking nonsense, but Asia used the Gemini skill, disappearing, landing a counter hit, then appearing behind him, starting to pop up, in different spots hitting the MC. That was the end of it. Combo skill of Taurus and Capricorn. Impact bombardment. However, Gion activated the Sagittarius skill, successfully tracking her speed. She couldn't believe it, even with the buffs from Taurus and Aquarius. He managed to find her, but then he found the opening. His body had been poisoned by Scorpio, cursing him from mid-air. Did he really think it would end like this? Combining the magic circles with her Libra, pushing the power of the 7 constellations to the max, John couldn't let himself be outdone, calling for his dragon to appear. Warnings were flashing. Due to all the condensed power being generated, the mere presence of it started to tear the place apart. While John advanced, the reporter told everyone to look at that. The power of the 7 constellations had gathered. In the soul sky, no one knew how it would end. That fight? But the only thing they knew in that apocalyptic situation was that they just had to trust John. They were demanding to know what Nona was doing, but Stephen himself stopped them, calling on all the disciples of Leo. Those who believed in humanity's salvation had to pray for John. Everyone had to back him up. The MC received their prayers, every bolt of power, every word, every feeling of faith, appearing right in front of her, receiving power from Stephen and the constellations, shouting that it was his turn to end this battle. As she took his hit, she mocked him. That was a defense created directly by a god. It was impenetrable. John asked what she was talking about. He also had attacks created by gods. Both summoning their magic circles, they shouted their names, and the destructive attacks collided. Alerts flashed that the Taurus stigma had disappeared, along with Capricorns, Aquarius, Aries, Cancer, and Gemini. Jian triumphantly claimed he'd won. She had said before that the strongest could ask the questions, so she couldn't die just yet. However, at that moment, a dark voice emerged. It couldn't believe he'd defeated Libra. Jian demanded to know who the hell this was. He introduced himself while shattering the ground as the guardian of the great unknown civilization, one of the 13 generals. Baron Helmet stating that 30 years ago, when the unknown civilization appeared, Helmet declared that this planet would be ruled by them. Jian understood. Was he related to the weaklings from before? And there to get revenge. He assumed Libra failed her mission. She was supposed to have built the Tower of the Monarch, recalling that in the past, he had defeated her. Because of him, he'd had to change his plan, thinking reconstruction would happen later. For now, he would eliminate him. John thought he was in luck, reckoning he showed up at the perfect time, attacking with the powers of the gods. But his attack was blocked. He made it clear that against the power from the constellations, the monarch's great power was nothing to him. Jian felt his strength being drained. He had already experienced that feeling before. He felt the same energy as the dagger that day, and because he was in an unknown dimension, the constellations were losing their connection, being left in complete darkness. At that moment, he heard a voice that broke his heart, asking what she was doing there, and his body was being stabbed, stating that with this skill, his body was now defenseless. That was the nightmare skill. It would use any memory to hurt him, telling Libra that it was her turn. Seeing her, he assumed she'd use his body to resurrect, asking if she really thought that was a good idea. She just mocked him in the end. She always won. Entering Jian's body, Helmet assumed he was a nuisance, but he hadn't even put up a fight. In the end, he was no big deal. But at that moment, we were shown the skill alert from the beginning of the Manhwa Super Regeneration, which was capable of restoring his damaged body, but it would have a slight 50% penalty for 1 near 32 hours of the penalty. And so we were told a bit about the MC's life, seeing his doubts. The cheerful man told them they were great. They were the defenders of humanity. If they didn't exist, everyone would have suffered because of those unknown monsters. And since they were already out of the house, they should go have some fun. Then little Jian was in shock that afternoon. Monsters appeared in Seoul. The forces didn't arrive in time. Jian just cursed because neither he nor they had done anything. The ones above didn't understand. What was up with that kid? They figured they should avoid him and go collect their reward, reporting on the news that thanks to them there were no victims at the scene. Little Jian just screamed that he couldn't protect them. Up there, Libra watched his memories. Understanding why he hated the constellations so much, it was an obvious story. She assumed his past would lead him to his death, no matter how strong. His rage was it couldn't overcome divinity. Now he just had to let himself be swallowed by the silence, beginning to devour him for her resurrection. But an alert popped up. The power gap was way too large. She screamed that it couldn't be. It didn't make any sense. Her divinity couldn't be lower than that scum's. However, looking up, she couldn't believe it. She refused to believe it. His skill went beyond her cognitive trait. How could a mutant like that turn into a divinity? And another warning appeared. Li Jian's penalty was breaking. Jian asked her if she knew the consequences of messing with people's memories. Astria demanded to know what the hell he was. Only 9 seconds left until the penalty was deactivated. Screaming at him, how the hell did he get that power? Jian felt like even he didn't know, but his hand held the power to destroy her. Helmet couldn't understand what was happening, watching Libra get blown away by Jian's power. And now he had no more restrictions. All his skills had been fully restored. He had taken his first step as a divine god. Those present couldn't understand what was going on. Wasn't the battle supposed to be over by now? What was that black thing in the center of the city? Hugo said that thing looked like the space perio had opened, and at that moment it started to crack. Helmet couldn't believe the space was being destroyed. Jian felt it had been a bit easier than he thought. They were so obnoxious. Mocking their monarch, this pissed Helmet off. He was just scum. But his attack was stopped with just a finger. Jian had a gift for her. Monarch stabbing her with the dagger, infused with the monarch's own power while telling her story. She should gratefully accept his gift, Libra. She didn't understand how an awakened could stand up to the power of the monarch himself. Even Baron Helmet had been defeated. She had to get out of there. But a dagger appeared, asking her where she was going. Seeing her insults, Jian smiled. This was the justice the world wanted so much. Gluttony skill, divinity absorption. That was the fate she had chosen for herself. Astria just screamed for help, and in her desperation, she released Libra's space. He was to be crushed by millions of tons. It didn't matter anymore if she died alone, but she didn't understand why that guy was smiling, and so Libra's space crushed them both. Hugo and Kevin asked where Jian was, and then his energy emerged impressively. The reporter said that Libra's palace was starting to change its appearance. Little by little, the gluttony skill had redirected the skill of Libra toward Ophiuchus's divinity. A new headquarters had opened. I didn't understand why Astra had made such a fuss. It had been just a pretty weak attack. It was all over for her. Then from Libra's perspective, we saw how she went to Helmet, convincing him that this time she would kill the owner of the snake. She didn't care that this man had defeated the tower's administrator, showing him that she now had allied gods on her side. She had even recovered the core of one of the disasters compared to her forces. That guy was just a baby snake. Helmet would support her, but she shouldn't lower her guard, believing that divine gods were always too vain. She accepted that. But it was the same with that thing, which was locked up. Deep within the demon tower, he could feel her. But whatever, for this one time, he would send the ghosts under his command to back her up. Jian figured those memories filled him with resentment, but he kept searching. Through the memories, the daughter appeared, greeting her and asking for forgiveness. Her brothers were dead, believing there was nothing she could do. Besides, she was amazed by that guy named Jian, but there was a bitch on his side. Nona couldn't stand her. That's why she decided to go with him. He shouldn't call her anymore. This was her final goodbye, apologizing for everything. Then it showed when the saints were gathered, thinking they were meeting up again, just like 20 years ago, starting to talk about how to get rid of that damn Libra once and for all. This time she was convinced, since it would be total war now, and they'd also have the support of the unknown civilization. Everyone was on board. Everyone wanted Li Jian dead no matter what it took. The MC realized they had spent those 20 years conspiring against him, using every trick in the book to get rid of him. Those bastards, his hatred was spiraling out of control. But voices kept calling his name over and over again. Waking up pissed, he wondered what had happened. Hugo figured he passed out after winning the battle. Jian got it. He must have used up all his strength right then, but everyone was just happy that he was okay. Gion watched the scene and smiled, then seeing their surprise, Jian told them it was no joke. He had seen the memories of the soul invasion and had entered Libra's memories. From now on, they would fight against the monarchs and the divine gods. Seeing them hesitate, he figured they got the point. As his goal since now, he could become the snake god, or the death god. But if that power was what pissed off his enemy so much, he would keep getting stronger. Anyway, they had to listen to him regardless. Now they would be fighting a higher class. They had to increase their strength and power, and grow strong together. Later at Jian's workshop, he had finished all the weapons, and now he had to put his new materials to good use. And looking aside, he didn't get why Helmet didn't destroy the tower, remembering that Libra mentioned someone was locked up there. But since he didn't have any more info, the only thing he could do was head straight into the tower. Luckily for him, the alert said he could now choose candidates to temporarily delegate power to. Then Hugo proudly told them that this was their new place to stay from now on, but it was only because his house was trashed and Jian provided this spot for him. His son was stoked because they were going to stay at their uncle's. Everyone was happy that they weren't in Sagittarius anymore, but Hugo shouted they'd go back once it was rebuilt, though they also wanted some comfort, starting to demand it, unpacking like crazy just to stay in that place. Then Gion arrived, asking Hugo to come along to see his daughter, because she would become a saint today. Hugo was having the worst day of his life. Wasn't he just supposed to give her a weapon? How could he make her his saint? His son, his wife, and now Nona. Everyone was going with him. Why the hell didn't he name him a saint too? Hearing this, Gion agreed. And by the time Hugo tried to protest, it was too late. Everyone was frozen as Gion welcomed them to Ophiuchus, pushing Sagittarius aside, demanding to know what that was about, and someone believed that Lee had finally arrived. Gion had to wait a bit longer, but he noticed an opening. Then Hugo was left with just a ghost. Now he would become Gion's slave. Starting to fight with Sagittarius, Gion didn't understand what all the fuss was about, and he cursed because once again, something was happening. A skeleton had found out that this was the Snake Lord's sanctuary and he had to get out. It was the unit under the Baron's command. Helmet had come for revenge. Hearing that, Gion laughed, asking where the rabbit was, and just like that, he grabbed it by the ears, telling it to behave. They were going to figure something out together, laughing sarcastically. The rabbit just begged him to stop. The army thought it was ridiculous. Only his subordinates were there. But since they were there, they'd have a little fun. First, he would deal with Zombie Face, launching a massive attack. The others wondered why. Hugo didn't react when he saw he'd been hit. They asked him if he was okay. He needed to say something. But since he was blessed by Ophiuchus, he had become exponentially stronger. The army figured if he could withstand that, their spear must be way too powerful. Believing then that their leader was a monster. A noise was heard. Someone was cutting down. The army with dual swords in hand. The only one who could defend himself was the general, demanding to know what she was doing. He explained that she was her own boss. Seeing that attack he managed to dodge, he wondered what Carly was doing. Collins there. She thanked him for the introduction. Since they knew each other from Leo's arena, she clearly beat him. That girl was the undefeated champion of the arena and had even beaten Nona. She was known as the strongest human in the world. Kevin had heard of her. Scorpion recognized her. But why was Giselle's daughter there? The general demanded to know why she was attacking them. Weren't those from Libra supposed to be allies? She denied it. She had nothing to do with Libra. She didn't care what happened to the unknown civilization, nor with the other constellations, because she would join Ophiuchus. Right then, John appeared asking what all the racket was about, unleashing energy throughout the entire place. That energy even wiped out part of the army. She got excited because he had arrived. John mocked them while opening the box, presenting Alvaro's head to Helmet. He was in a good mood today, so for today, they could take it and get lost. Hearing their complaints, Gion told them to mind their own business. The general didn't know what to do. That guy from before and Gion were way too strong, and with their lord's spirit, they could revive him. That's why for now, they would accept his offer. Later, Gion asked her if she was there to join. Seeing her, agreement. He turned her down. He couldn't accept her yet. He was grateful, but he couldn't trust her yet. Scorpion explained, as they already knew she was. Giselle's daughter, not biologically, because Libra loved her children, but she was still his daughter. Asking for the truth about why she was there? She whispered some words, very shyly saying that John was her father, but no one heard that, arguing that she just wanted to be stronger, and so she would prove she was worthy. John thought she was a good contender. Plus, the system told him her faith was at 200% toward Ophiuchus, though it felt a bit weird that she had his genes. For now, accepting her meant she had to prove her skills. She was overjoyed beyond belief while Giselle was exploding with nerves, remembering she thought she heard that she was his daughter. But that wasn't possible while Kevin was asking him why he let Baron Helmet go, but he denied it. That head wasn't Helmet's. It was actually the Capricorn Rabbit Yang dude. He was just complaining because Gion had told him that if he took the fake body he made, they could steal information, and he had to listen. If he did, he'd get his original body back. Though he couldn't really say no, he was literally being forced. He just had to pretend to be that thing. Capricorn was cursing. Plus, he was asking why they were going to the Demon Tower. They told him that there was something that could give him back his original body and form, showing us this guy entering the lowest floor of the tower. There they could restore his condition by saying some prayers and extracting the guy's energy. He asked the Baron to absorb that energy, who just got spooked hearing those words. He told him that wasn't it. He wasn't scared for his body, but because that thing was starting to move. And the mummy-looking guy laughed, claiming that he wasn't one of his own kind. Why was he wearing the armor of Baron Helmet? They didn't get why that thing was moving. As he explained, he was one of the monarchs who had been dormant for ages, but had been awakened by the power of the snake. Calling the army stupid, he told them to shut it, freezing time for them for a second. Grabbing Capricorn, he demanded to know what the hell he was. When he heard who it was, he denied it couldn't be. He had a different energy. He had to say who was protecting him. He had to get out of there. From a distance, Gion figured he'd been made, believing he already knew he had to meet the monarch, but he didn't expect to meet him so soon. He laughed. It seemed like he was a divine god newly awakened. Could it be that he was the mutant god? Hearing that he also knew who he was, he cursed. So he knew what kind of state he was in. He had been trapped there, starving to death, for a long time. That's why he'd swallow his saint's power. He shouted at John to do something. He was going to vanish. John yelled back, asking what he was saying. He needed to stop talking nonsense. That guy wasn't his saint, the monarch. Cursed, saying it was a very bad taste. Hearing the repeated pleas to save him, he felt that his debt was now paid off, making it clear that he had sent him because of an ability he had. He'd always remember him and Capricorn. Started his self-destruction. John felt it was beautiful. Good thing he knew Capricorn had that ability. He figured he'd check that place out later, and a notification arrived, asking what the hell he meant by that. Nona couldn't believe it. He never thought a situation like this would happen. Stephen demanded to know how he dared abandon his headquarters and join another. Everyone was asking their lord to calm down, but Nona denied it. He wasn't Stephen. John mentioned that the divine god, Narasimha, had appeared, demanding that he would give him a chance to explain. Also because Stephen was missing his arms and was in another order. Nona felt it was hard to explain, so he should read the manga from chapter 76 to 86. Narasimha accepted showing his arms, understanding what was happening. He figured his saint had summoned him to fight that thing, but since there was no more risk, he had to discipline them all, unleashing his power. A quest popped up for Nona. To join Ophiuchus, she had to stop Narasimha. She knew it would be tough, but she'd do whatever it took to get into her Uncle Gian's order. They were both trading words. Narasimha was charging up his power, unleashing a massive beam that tore the place apart. Nona thought it was dangerous, and a voice told her to slam the spear into the ground. He didn't get it. That damn strength belonged to Gion. He was going to tear down that barrier with his own hands. Thunderclaws. But Gion stopped him, calling him the leader of the alley cats, asking him what he was doing to his saint, punching him and slamming him to the floor. Gion smiled. He was always so reckless. Even if it was a quest, she couldn't fight against a divine god. This time he had to step in for her own good, but Narasima still wouldn't give up, yelling for him to get his feet off his head. Gion figured he was strong, asking him why he had descended to this world. He explained it was because of his saint's call, but since he was sleeping, he was late coming down. He felt a bit embarrassed for taking so long, but regardless how, dare he look down on him and steal his disciples? And now seeing that great power, he didn't know why he was making such a fuss, but since it was a fight against the clock, they had to battle. His penalty had been lifted, so he was going to test out his new power. Narasima screamed that he was an arrogant bastard and was going to crush him. Gion, with just one hand, asked if that was all he had. His strength meant nothing to him anymore, sending him flying back while leaping, begging him to at least give him a good fight. Narasima yelled again for him not to be so cocky. Celestial judgment, Lotus. He started laughing. He still had a long way to go. He should just turn to ash. Gion told him to keep dreaming, unleashing the power of Ophiuchus Disaster Lotus. Laughing, he thought his technique was pretty damn good. That's why he had to share it. But alerts started popping up everywhere. The gods' powers were way too strong for this world. If they kept going, at this rate they could cause a total catastrophe. Narasima just mocked him, telling him to bring it on. Was he scared or something? It was clear they couldn't keep fighting for long. He'd have to head back soon. But at least he knew he wasn't a big deal. Gion laughed. He didn't know why he hadn't used that from the start. Pulling out Helmet's weapon, he dragged Narasima into the unknown dimension. That was another solid skill. That's why he'd stolen it too. He asked how many resources he had left to fight as alerts appeared, warning that all his resources would soon run out. They called him out for not paying attention, managing to break one of his fangs. But that was nothing to Gion, who kept attacking, over and over again. Narasima released his power, managing to overpower the unknown dimension, trapping Gion in an electrical field. It was his damn end. Gion thought he acted a lot like Steven when he got excited. He had to check the alerts. They said that all of Leo's resource points had been consumed. The divine god had to return to the divine realm. Narasima just kept cursing. This couldn't be happening right when he was about to win. Gion thought the only thing he'd won at was being an idiot. Hearing his threats, he told him the feeling was mutual. They were confused about what had happened, but Gion told Nona that since everything was back to normal, she had to finish her mission. A half-dead Steven wondered what was going on. Nona explained what had happened, along with the whole mission she had to do to join Ophiuchus. Steven asked her if she really thought she could defeat him, and seeing her move, he got into a fighting stance, but Nona bowed to him and asked for his forgiveness, thanking him for everything. She wanted to become stronger, and that was why she had to go with her uncle. She knew he was disappointed. She knew better than anyone what a good person, brave and kind-hearted he really was, but this time she had to move on. That's why she begged him to please accept her change of constellation. Steven nodded. Hearing their complaints, he told everyone to calm down. It was a worthy choice. Maybe he had held back her growth, but now she had to leave. She had to become stronger than all of them combined. She had to prove her true, worth asking her to say hi to Gion for him. As she left, Steven figured that maybe that speech had convinced her to stay. But when he turned around, he just got whacked in the head with a shovel, fulfilling her mission. She told her uncle that now they could finally head back to Korea.